Hey, what's going on, everybody? So today's video is actually going to be about the right wing, far right, disinformation actors, troll farms, bot accounts that will be used to influence the 2024 election. The sort of 8chan, right wing, alt right, sort of bot accounts that are, I believe, being controlled by people within the MAGA movement, such as disgraced General Michael Flynn, who was implicated in the Russiagate investigation. Whether you believe Russiagate or not, there was still visible evidence that Russians did not necessarily have an influence on, changing votes, but they definitely had a vested interest in Donald Trump winning the election and were having backdoor dialogues and communications with various Trump actors, such as the infamous Trump Tower meeting that we'll go into detail about, but also through actors such as Eric Prince, formerly of Blackwater, meeting with Russians in the Seychelles on behalf of Jared Kushner. So my theory, my belief is that there is an Anglo-American, Israeli, and Russian far right, right wing effort working in cahoots with each other, who are going to be used to influence the 2004 election, similarly to what they did in 2016. Um, and yeah, so I'm just gonna get to the point. I'm going to show you a video of Michael Flynn talking about, literally talking about, an army of digital soldiers.
Okay, as a soldier and as a general, as a retired general, we have an army of digital soldiers. What we are now, what we call, I call them, because this was an insurgency, folks. This was run like an insurgency. This was irregular warfare at its finest in politics, and that story will continue to be told here. But we have what we call citizen journalists. Okay, because the journalists that we have in our media did a disservice to themselves, actually more than they did to this country. They did a disservice to themselves because they displayed an arrogance that is unprecedented. And so the American people decided to take over the idea of information. They took over the idea of information, and they did it through social media. And we have an army, okay, as a soldier and as a general, as a retired general, we have an army of digital soldiers. What we
So you even have Michael Flynn right there admitting that he has an army of digital soldiers, and he's talking about how in a populist movement they've taken over social media, right? So essentially, he's kind of like the commander general in chief of the online postmodern warfare disinformation campaign um, that's working for the Trump administration or the Trump campaign now. But you have to realize that MAGA was in cahoots with the with Zionists across the pond. You have Zionists in the United States, but you have Zionists proper, i.e., Israelis in Israel, right? So you have MAGA is essentially in cahoots with Israel, and Israel has deep connections to Russia, and Russia also has some influence in Great Britain through their oligarchs and stuff like that. And you have American kind of influence and British influence kind of exchanging with each other, such as with the Brexit campaign, Cambridge Analytica, with the Facebook data sharing scandal. Many people on Cambridge Analytica were associated with the conservative uh, think tank group called the Council for National Policy. So you're literally seeing an international right wing conspiracy to use misinformation, to use trolls, bot accounts, farms, to basically push right wing to far right, basically fascist sentiments, in order to destabilize Western democracies so that they crumble and they can therefore be retaken by right wing elites and oligarchs, with a cherry on top of this kind of Judeo-Christian Zionist millennialism end times doomsday prophecy. And it's insane. It's insane, and it never really got addressed. Um, I think a big thing about the whole RussiaGate situation is that whether you believe RussiaGate or not, I like to say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So even if, let's just say that there was a lot of DC insiders involved in the RussiaGate situation, does not mean that there weren't Russian influence and attempts to co-opt the American Republican Party, who are not Republican in the European sense. They're Republican in the American sense of kind of being far right, right wing, and kind of benefiting the 1% in the rich industrial class. Um, uh, so whether or not you believe Russiagate or not, um, there were still many examples of Russian kind of cultural influence, more so in the United States. Let's not even get confused with the political stuff because, I think a lot of people oversimplified Russiagate to make it sound like Russians were changing ballots and stuff like that or hacking into machines. I don't believe that. What I believe is that Russia, after the Cold War ended in the late 80s, and after the Yeltsin years and all that, which were very traumatic for Russia, where they were experiencing hyperinflation, AIDS, a mass outflow of people to the United States and elsewhere for a better life, you started noticing the monopolization of former Soviet industries by the oligarch class, and you also saw the rise of a young KGB agent, later turned politician named Vladimir Putin, who eventually has now been a dictator for life over Russia. Um, so there was a lot of the Russians realized after the Cold War that trying to infiltrate the West via the left wing, right, via hippies and stuff like that, right, how they used to try to do it in the past, in theory, um, they needed to figure out a new strategy. So what's the new strategy? The right wing. As Russia was liberalizing their economy, in other words, making it more capitalist, and you started noticing this extreme wealth disparity and stuff like that, etc. Russia, in theory, was kind of modernizing, but they still wanted, I think, more influence in the West. So they started appealing to the Republican Party, and this is where you get Marina Butina at the with the NRA, right, meeting with notable Republicans like Bobby Jindal of Louisiana or Scott Walker, I believe, of Wisconsin, and the head of the NRA. She was a Russian spy and a Russian asset, sent here to get in bed, possibly even figures literally, to kind of rub shoulders with Republicans. Then what else we have here? And also within the alt right. So the alt right, which is this kind of 8chan, 4chan community of kind of fascists, neo Nazis, etc. The same type of people who are doing the digital war for Michael Flynn via his organizations, his front organizations like the Young Americans and stuff like that. The alt right has an affinity with Russia. They have an affinity with European fascists, such as Julius Evola, but they were also very fascinated by Russian thinker Aleksandr Dugin, who at this point is kind of relatively well known. He's not as cryptic as he used to be, but Aleksandr Dugin is kind of this weird Rasputin-like occultic figure who believes in a fascist fascism, In other words, his goal is to re-expand the Russian Empire to its original boundaries, or to expand Russian Federation's power back to the Soviet Union's borders. And he also vehemently hates the West, which includes Europe and the United States, because he considers them to be the liberal, bourgeoisie, decadent, modernist kind of societies who beat Russia. The West defeated Russia. So the Russian intellectuals and some of the older generals at this point, who are all Soviets, um, uh, Putin was a Soviet. They still have a gripe on their shoulder about the power that they lost. So as a result, because they can't fight a war with the United States and NATO, uh, even though we're seeing an indirect war via Ukraine, they have to use fourth dimensional warfare. And what I mean by fourth dimensional warfare is postmodern warfare. And what I mean by postmodern is, in the philosophical sense, beyond modern. In other words, beyond facts, where reality is subjective. In other words, the conservatives who claim to like objective truths are actually using solipsism, relativity, revisionist history as a weapon to destabilize the consciousness of people in the West and the United States, to make them more conducive to this right wing fascist agenda that they have planned. So it's very complex. This is the type of stuff that you can't you can try to explain this to your grandma in Ohio or Indiana or Michigan or something. It's just so beyond most people that it's hard to believe. So we literally had Mike Flynn talking about having digital armies, right? So let me pause something so I can pull something up for you real quick. Okay, so I wanted to pull up something for you real quick. So how we have Michael Flynn over here talking about a digital army, right?
And we have an army, okay, as a soldier and as a general, as a retired general. We have an army of digital soldiers. What we are now, I call them, because this was an insurgency, folks. This was run like an insurgency.
Okay, so you notice the Young Americans for Foundation logo behind them, right? So who is that? So the Young American Foundation, YAF, is a nonprofit conservative youth organization founded in 1969. In 2018, the Los Angeles Times called the organization one of the most preeminent, influential, and controversial forces in the nation's conservative youth movement. Scott Walker, former governor of Wisconsin and 2016 Republican presidential candidate, became their president in February 1st, 2021. Notable alumni members include Jeff Sessions and Stephen Miller, right? So it's almost kind of one of these organizations where it's a prerequisite to have it on your resume in order to enter politics. It's like a way for basically, it's like a little it's like the Hitler Youth of just the Republican Party, basically. And then let me see here. Revenues 33 million. So let me see here. And I guarantee you the difference between the revenues or expenses are probably what Scott Walker's making is just administering it, right? So Young American Foundation held its first national conservative student conference in 1979. It is a co-founder of the annual conservative political action conference and has been a prominent supporter of the event since then. In 1998, it purchased the Reagan Ranch, Rancho del Celio, near Santa Barbara, California, with the help of a $10 million endowment from Amway billionaires Richard and Helen Davos, which is interesting. That's the family that Eric Prince's sister, Betsy Davos or Betty Davos, married into. Betty Davos, right? So another connection to them. So you can find a direct link even to um, Eric Prince in Blackwater just through that. Very interesting. So look at this, right? So in 2017, the organization had 250 high school and college affiliates known as Young Americans for Freedom, which was originally a separate organization. In July 2019, it has announced that former governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker, would become the president in 2021. In November 2019, the Young Americans for Freedom cut ties with longtime speaker Michelle Malkin, who voiced her support for far right for alt right activist, Nick Fuentes, the neo-Nazi white supremacist, right? Very interesting. And so the thing about that, so you have an Asian American, and there's a weird nexus sometimes between. I'm not talking like not here to throw Asian women under the bus, but I think what's her name, like Tia Tanaka or Tia Tequila or whatever her name was. Now you have Michelle Malkin. Sometimes you have this kind of weird intersection between like Asian females and white men as supporting like far right candidates and stuff like that, in fascism. That's just an interesting thing. Another side note, but so, anyways, let's skip down here. So, YAF is a member of the advisory board of Project 25, a collection of conservative and right wing policy proposals from the Heritage Foundation to reshape the United States federal government and consolidate executive power should the Republican nominee win the 2024 election. In other words, they want to make Trump into a dictator. So the people talking about freedom are trying to are trying to consolidate executive power, something that Republicans always claim that they were against. They're always, moaning about executive orders and stuff. Now they want to take it times 1,000 and give Donald Trump all the power. So think about that, right? We literally went from uh actually, before I even get out of here, right? So then we got Scott Walker. Scott Walker, I wanted to bring this up, is if we go to, I made a video talking about how Charlie Kirk is basically an idiot. Um, the reason why I said that is because one of the many reasons why I said that is because one of the donors to Charlie Kirk are the Richard and Elizabeth Uihlein uh, couple, and they're an American billionaire business people, founders of Uihlein, which is like a logistics and shipping and packing service. But they're also the heirs to the Schlitz brewing fortune. They are donors to Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, but then also, as we're learning, they're most likely donors to the Young Americans Foundation, and they have ties to that because they were involved in helping Scott Walker in his political career. So the Uihlein spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in the 2011 Wisconsin Senate recall elections, yada, yada, yada. So the Uihleins, he has supported conservative groups and candidates, including Ted Cruz, Roy Moore. Remember, if you don't, a lot of y'all may not remember, and that's fine. Is that I want to say Roy Moore was the guy who Steve Bannon tried to get. Yep, exactly. They tried to make him into a senator from Alabama to fill the vacant seat of Jeff Sessions. But Roy Moore, this Republican guy, was accused by several women of sexually assaulting them while they were underage. And this candidate, Roy Moore, was propped up by Steve Bannon. Yep. So Steve Bannon, Steve Bannon now in jail for defrauding Trump supporters in private build the wall private fundraisers where he and others basically just pocketed the money and ran. He's in jail for that. Um, Other things that Bannon was involved with that kind of feeds into this video talking about digital warriors and troll farms and bot farms is that actually um, one of the ways how uh, Steve Bannon made money was by, as crazy as it sounds, farming World of Warcraft in-game trinkets and treasure. And that sounds crazy, right? You know, like I'm not a big gamer or anything, but the thing is, when you play those role-playing type games, you actually can spend money buying little parts, right? You know, if you want to build armor, or a sword, or build magic or something, whatever, right? You actually pay real world money. You have kids asking their parents to make purchases through Microsoft or Blizzard or whatever, so they can actually have the money to buy those in-game things, right? Steve Bannon realized he can make money off of that, so he employed um, Chinese sweatshop workers to work around the clock to mine all of those little in-game trinkets, and then he would resell them to American kids at insane upcharges. And it was crazy. Like, he was basically ripping off kids. So he was ripping off kids, and let's not forget that Steve Bannon is also has ties to Goldman Sachs because he was an employee of Goldman Sachs. So he's actually a part of the banking class of the 1%, despite his populism. So he was not only doing that, he was ripping off kids, ripping off grandmothers, trying to write checks for the wall and stuff like that. And he also, Steve Bannon, was also arrested on the yacht of an alleged double Chinese agent called Guo, Guo, Wengui, Wengui. Google that. Steve Bannon was arrested on his boat for the build the wall defraud scandal, but Guo Wengui has just been indicted on multiple federal accounts for ripping off anti-communist Chinese dissidents living in America, in which Guo Wengui stole possibly up to hundreds of millions, if not in total value $1 billion, through fraud, by having kind of fake shell companies, pump and dump crypto schemes, stealing his supporters' money. Him and Guo and Steve Bannon tried to set up this thing called GTV, which is kind of like this fraudulent kind of YouTube streaming platform, in which they defrauded investors. Um, so Guo Wengui is now in jail. Guo Wengui, this is so interesting. Guo Wengui was actually featured on Voice of America. Voice of America is a U.S. government ran news outlet, right? And it falls under, I think, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, USAGM. So USAGM is the organization, is an independent federal corporation, kind of like PBS, right? Um, they oversee the Voice of America and radio stations, called like Free Radio Europe and Free Radio Asia, right? So Donald Trump nominated a person named Michael Pack. Michael Pack, who was the leader of USAGM under Trump for a while, actually is a member of the conservative Claremont Institute based in Claremont, California. Claremont Institute is another right wing crypto organization who are actually the ones who proliferated the Obama birther conspiracy. And the Claremont Institute have resurfaced as trying to call Kamala Harris's citizenship into question. So think about that. We went from the Claremont Institute, this moonwalk, right? I know I'm putting a lot of information on you, but I'm trying to get it all out there because this is all interconnected. The right wing global fascist conspiracy, it's all connected. So Claremont Institute, Obama birther stuff, Kamala birther stuff. Michael Pack was a member. Michael Pack was a member. He gets nominated to be the CEO of the federal government's U.S. Agency for Global Media, which oversees Voice of America, right? Um, Another side note about Michael Pack is Michael Pack was under criminal investigation for taking federal tax dollar money uh, through his nonprofits to make, because he would make kind of like educational documentaries or whatever. He was taking federal grant money, um, putting it in his nonprofit, but then siphoning that money to his for-profit private production companies. So he was kind of he wasn't indicted, but he was investigated for it. And despite him being investigated during the time of that whole scandal of moving money between the nonprofit and his for-profit organization, he was still confirmed by Congress to be the leader of the U.S. Agency for Global Media that oversees Voice of America, right? So at Voice of America, Michael Pack, who is essentially a sneak preview of what the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 is going to do, um, he essentially kind of fired people who weren't pro-Trump. He tried to essentially turn Voice of America into almost Benito Mussolini-like Trump state TV. And he was removing journalist press credentials. He was kind of out of control. He was so out of control that employees of Voice of America actually sued him. And they had to bring in independent auditors and investigators to actually look into the gross misabuse of employees he was doing. So he was actually only the leader of Voice of America and US AGM for like a year because he was so controversial. But during that time frame, he invited Guo Wengui, Steve Bannon's little crook in crime, onto Voice of America because Voice of America, as basically state propaganda for the United States government, they were trying to promote a lot of anti-communist Chinese stuff on there. So they invited this fraudster, Guo Wengui, on there to basically promote all of this anti-China stuff, right? Because it's in the best interest of U.S. foreign policy, right? The interesting thing is that Guo Wengui is actually possibly a double agent working for the Chinese communists. So this is the thing, right? So when Guo Wengui was, I think, being investigated, he was living in a like a skyrise penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park or something on Fifth Avenue in New York. When investigators were looking into him, mysteriously, his apartment, this is crazy, Guo Wengui's apartment set ablaze. And investigators determined that it was actually set ablaze remotely. No fire in the house, remotely. And investigators discovered over 100 electronic detection equipment, surveillance equipment, and the kind of foyer, entrance, atrium, kind of where he would hold his business meetings, was actually wired with cameras. So it's possible that this Guo Wengui was actually operating a kind of Jeffrey Epstein incrimination kind of campaign from his penthouse apartment that he was paying for with money that he was stealing from actual Chinese anti-communist dissidents. Um, and some of the guests at Guo Wengui's apartment was people like Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister, who actually helped the George Bush administration create the pretext for the invasion of Iraq. Crazy stuff, right? So this is just Guo Wengui. Um, so then Guo Wengui, Steve Bannon, Council for National Policy, Young Americans, like Scott Walker, the Uihlein family, like it all starts making sense here. The Mercer family with Breitbart, it's all this kind of 1% exclusive right wing American fascist group who talk about liberty and freedom. So that's always been the history of fascism in America, is that these groups always like to call themselves patriots, liberty, stuff like that. But they use that liberty ethos to essentially take over the government in order to give it to the 1%. And this was actually tried once before, actually in something called the business plot that happened in like the 1920s or 30s, in which I even believe the Bush family and some other notable families um, tried to overthrow FDR. So let's look that up real quick. So it's called 1933. So this is what I'm saying, man. This is why Republicans are actually dangerous, and there's nothing more dangerous than when fascists think they're the patriots, because they think they're talking about freedom and individual and liberty. But if that's the case, then why are they not respecting the personal liberty of everybody else? Why are they not respecting the liberty of LGBTQ people? Why are they not respecting, black people's liberty against their, grievances against police brutality, without gaslighting black people as if they're always the problem and they're not being racially profiled for the color of their skin? It's so interesting that there's nothing more dangerous than when the insurrectionists think that they're the patriots and they start seeing their fellow Americans as the threat, and they're ready to do violence, which has been something that Heritage Foundation people have outright said, right? So let's talk about the business plot. And let me take a break real quick, and I'll be right back. But remember, the whole overall goal of this is talking about the kind of troll farms, digital bot armies that this right wing global fascist network is using, right? And I've kind of showed you some of the back history here, but that's kind of the overall gist of the video. It's kind of like the digital war, the postmodern warfare that conservatives and the right wing are waging on democracies of the West at the behest of the 1% and the Russians and the Zionist Israelis and the evangelical Christian 1%, etc. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back, right? So we're going to talk about the business plot here that was done in 1933, but this is actually the president of the Heritage Foundation, who are the authors of Project 2025. Project 2025 is a conservative, far-right, anti-democratic agenda to gut the federal government in the administrative state and give all the power to the executive, in other words, the president, i.e., Donald Trump, making him a dictator, in order to bring forth their right wing, evangelical, right wing Christian. I'm not even going to throw all Christians under the bus, just these type of quasi white supremacist, right wing, patriarchal Christians, their agenda. They're these handmade tail dudes who want to tell you what to do with your life. They're trying to take over the federal government, and they want to get rid of women's reproductive rights. They want to get rid of understanding diversity in history and just kind of whitewash history. They want to get rid of people's sexual freedom in the bedroom and the privacy of their own homes and turn us into a puritanical state. They possibly want to get rid of birthright citizenship. They want to turn the United States into an isolationist, right wing, white supremacist, hermetic kingdom in unison with the Zionist Israelis and the Eastern Orthodox Russian oligarchs. And both of them, as far as I'm concerned, is that the Republican Party, in even talking about this stuff, is treason. Is treason in and of itself. And when you look at January 6th and what they got away with, and it's crazy that we even let that slip. Why did we even let them forget January 6th? Is ridiculous. And now we're still worried about Trump coming back. It almost makes me think there is a concerted effort, even by the quote unquote centrist, the center left mainstream media, like the MSNBCs and sometimes the CNNs or something like that, because they're capitalist businesses. So therefore, they'll go to wherever the wind is. When they realize that Trump may have had a chance of winning, I think that they actually stopped the coverage and pressure on Trump in January 6th. But that's kind of changing now that President Biden is stepping down from rerunning, and Kamala Harris, who has a lot more, energy, to her has a chance of actually giving Trump a run for his money, if not winning outright herself. So now you're starting to see a shift in the center left, MSNBC, CNBC type stuff, media against Trump. But for a long time, they were kind of suppressing their anti-Trump rhetoric because the CNNs felt that they were losing out on viewership because it seemed like they had gone too far left during the times of Don Lemon and those type of people before they totally cleaned house over at Warner Brothers Discovery, who I believe owns CNN via the whole Turner acquisition. So that's another story. But this is crazy, right? So this is the leader of the Heritage Foundation, author of Project 25, talking about how he plans to kill the left, and he's threatening us with violence. Why is he not being investigated by the FBI? Both enemies, foreign and domestic. He's literally talking about violence. Are people using the Patriot Act on him, tapping his phones, knocking on his door? You know what I'm saying? Like we've thrown kids into federal prison for like hacking into like their school. But this ghoul, this guy, they're all bald-headed white dudes, by the way. Most of them wants to tell you what to do.
That we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. That we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. That we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Okay, so I'm back. All right, so we have the Heritage Foundation guy talking about, violence if they don't get their way. We have Michael Flynn talking about how he's using digital armies to basically take over social media. And now we have the Ohio State Senator suggesting that civil war is possible if Trump doesn't win. In other words, they're intimidating us with fear and violence if they don't get their way. The left has never done this. You know what I'm saying? Like, sure, there'll be protests or something like that. Some stuff will get out of control, but as an attack on federal institutions like this is crazy. Who's really calling for the violence here? Who are the ones pressure stunting people with their AR-15s and guns and making these, bold, triumphant, truck convoys with their oversized trucks and Trump flags and stuff? And Donald Trump is out here talking about Proud Boys, stand back, stand by, the little jackboot thugs of Gavin McInnes and everything. Where Gabus McGinnis, interestingly, has ties to Rayhan Salam, and Rayhan Salam is the president of the Manhattan Institute of Urban Studies or Urban Policy, and the Manhattan Institute has direct ties to the Central Intelligence Agency because it was founded by a CIA director, William Casey, in the 1980s. And the Manhattan Institute has ties to right-wing billionaires like Peter Thiel, and Peter Thiel or Thiel is the person who actually backed J.D. Vance, who is therefore now Donald Trump's vice president pick. It all interconnects. It all interconnects.
Senator George Lang is now apologizing after comments he made in his speech leading up to Vance taking the stage. Take a listen to this.
I believe wholeheartedly Donald Trump and Butler County's J.D. Vance are the last chance to save our country politically. I'm afraid if we lose this one, It's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved.
Lang's reference to a civil war immediately drew criticism. He has issued a statement saying, "I regret the divisive remarks I made in excitement of the moment on stage, especially in light of the assassination attempt on President Trump last week. We should all be mindful of what is said at political events, myself included." Lang represents District 4. That includes Middletown, Oxford, Hamilton, and more.
Hey, sorry about that. So now, this is a video of Donald Trump talking about the Proud Boys stand back and stand by, right?
You have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared to
do
specifically
that,
do it? Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. Do you want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
who would you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing. This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacists. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia. That's what his FBI director said.
Well, then you know what?
No, we're done, sir. We're moving.
Don't you notice that he never even disavowed the Proud Boys? He says stand back, stand by, because I guarantee you he knows through his little insiders at the White House or whatever, who have, direct ties to the street teams and the right wing little groups and stuff like that. Even the Young Americans or whatever like that, some of them are probably Proud Boys. He didn't want to disavow them. He even said stand back and stand by. You know what I'm saying? It's amazing to me how right-wing terrorism is always undermined in this country, which just goes to show how we have been brainwashed and to think that, a group or a movement, let's just say that I don't agree with their tactics, right? Let's just say the Antifa stuff, right? I consider Antifa basically to be a bunch of like Rage Against the Machine college kids with bike locks or something, going around making sure to police the right wing fascists who show up to try to start stuff. But then we gaslight and obfuscate Antifa, which means anti-fascist. Can you believe we live in a country where we demonize the anti-fascist? So if we demonize the anti-fascist, that means we're celebrating the pro-fascist, or we're undermining what it is they do. You know what I'm saying? There is no equivalence. That's the thing about America. We're always trying to look for the moderate position or whatever. No, there's no moderation here at all. Period. There's no moderation. Antifa's always going to be better than the Proud Boys and the KKK and the neo-Nazis and Patriot Front. Always. Antifa's always going to be on the right, more of a right side of history than they ever could be. So trying to create these false equivalencies is nonsense. So we got this guy talking about violence. We got of the Heritage Foundation. We got Trump Proud Boys. We got Senator George Lang talking about Civil War. We got whatchamacallit, digital soldiers of Michael Flynn, right? So I was going to talk to you about the business plot because that's the ultimate goal of all of this, the global right wing agenda, right? So, conservatives like to talk about the New World Order. The New World Order, people, is not left wing. The New World Order is a right wing fascist uh, global fascism. That's why you're starting to see the erosion and the encouragement to undermine and unravel democracy in favor of quote unquote traditionalism, right? What is traditionalism? What is traditionalism conducive to? It's conducive to monarchy. It's conducive to fascism. It's conducive to elevating and deifying a 1% by giving the people hypernationalism as crumbs on the surface while they're being economically exploited by the 1%. But the people feel like they're in an in group, based on nationality, an ethno-nationalist type group. They're the in group, but they feel power by discriminating and fighting out groups. So Donald Trump represents the unraveling of the global post World War II order, in which before World War II and World War I, you had all these countries competing with each other. It was kind of mercantilism. Still a colonial period. They were competing over resources. Countries were also on the gold standard. So the more gold a country had, the more wealth they had. But if there's only so much gold, what do? You have to plunder people. So a lot of those events actually helped to cause the Great Depression and World War One. And after World War II, we decided through the economics of British economist John Maynard Keynes, Keynesianism, who developed Keynesianism, that you don't need gold in a deflationary asset in order to fund governments. You can actually deficit spend, create money, and actually to create demand in order to help lower unemployment, which was the case that leaders like Franklin Delano Roosevelt kind of implemented some of those proto Keynesian ideas and actually helped the United States with the New Deal. Of course, war Keynesianism, the war economy of World War II, because of Japan and Nazi Germany and Italy, that helped push America into near 100% employment rates. But the government was creating demand and everything like that, though, too. But the thing is after World War II, we realized that, even though we were still technically on gold, governments were still able to print and make a lot more of their currency more than they ever were before. But countries were exchanging currencies and then also swapping gold with each other. So you had a lot more interchange between countries. And I know I'm not explaining this 100% correct, but in other words, in summary, there was a lot more post-war cooperation. Instead of killing each other for resources, we would basically exchange more through currency swapping and stuff like that, right? In the world would use the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency of the world, but those U.S. dollars would be backed by X amount of gold. So America was able to make the dollar effectively the premier currency of global finance around the globe on the conditions that X amount of it was backed and pegged by gold, and stuff like that, right? So this elevated the U.S. dollar to the premier currency, which therefore had an even more positive impact on post-war 1950s up to the 60s success of the baby boomer, when they were kids and stuff like that and young children. But then after, during America's war in Vietnam and just a lot of different things, the cooling of the post-war miracle and all that type of stuff, America found itself more in debt and had to drop the gold standard as a result, causing even more kind of runaway inflation through the 1970s, which is why the 70s was kind of this weird transitional kind of period of time it was basically just one long recession. And because of the lack of economic stability, you had a lot more counterculture normalizing itself within the American population. Therefore, like more lifestyle movements, counterculture, etc. But the backlash to that counterculture led to um, led to the Reagan Revolution of the 1980s and everything. So all this stuff is interconnected, right? But that aside, what Donald Trump represents is an unraveling of that post World War II order in belief in institutions. And don't get me wrong, many of these institutions, such as the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, in other words, the International Monetary Fund, even the United Nations, these aren't perfect institutions because institutions are hollow and they're filled by people, and people are corruptible, and they're always going to be corruptible regardless of what organization system you have. This is just the human condition, unfortunately. But you're noticing because corporations since World War II have gained so much influence that they're largely bigger than the GDPs, gross domestic products of entire countries. And they realize that. They realize they don't work for government, government works for them. So therefore, what's the best? So therefore, to keep pushing over the line, corporations who are essentially borderless, they have the rights of people, even though they're not physically people, because there's a concept called corporate personhood. These corporations are able to give unlimited campaign financing to candidates through controversial Supreme Court approved decisions, such as Citizens United. So they're able to just bankroll as much money as they want. But these corporations can also now vote in certain places. For example, there's controversial cases such as in the state of Delaware, where most U.S. corporations are incorporated because Delaware doesn't have a federal, doesn't have, I'm sorry, Delaware does not have a corporate income tax. Rather, corporations only pay a little franchise fee, and by incorporating in Delaware, you're able to bypass taxes elsewhere throughout the country, because you're able to claim Delaware as kind of like your residency, essentially. But the more disturbing part about corporations is they're able to vote in municipal elections in certain cities now. So therefore, you have this dystopian future where McDonald's in ExxonMobil are like in control of the board of education, or they're in charge of public utilities, or they're in charge of the police. Therefore, you start noticing that democracy via capitalism starts actually regressing into neo-feudalism, techno-feudalism, where you have these royal houses, basically corporations, ruled by dictators and lords like the Elon Teals and the Bill Gates and the Elon Musk and the House of Zuckerberg and the House of Bezos or whatever, the Duchy of Uihlein, all these different types of people, they take over the world. Is that simple? Government was just something in the way. It's almost kind of like an inverted Marxist prophecy, where in Marxism, which is a form of communism, it's not explicitly communist. Marxism is a type of communism, and communism is a type of socialism. I think a lot of people in the United States forget that. But the Marxists believed, or I believe it was Engels, who was Marx's contemporary, prophesized that the state would wither away, basically. The state, after the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat taking over everything and making everything into essentially a big workers' union, the state would eventually wind away, wither away. So the thing is that capitalism has the same utopian goal in mind, because the state is supposed to wither away as well. But rather than in the Marxist sense of everybody being equal in the end, the capitalist utopian scheme is to only have the 1% being controlled after the state withers away. And what's interesting is that Even though there's all these debates between capitalism and socialism, right? The truth of the matter is that those are actually twin ideologies deriving from the same source. Capitalism and what we consider to be socialism are both influenced by 1600s, 1700s, if not further, going all the way back to the early Renaissance in Italy, Enlightenment movements, right? So in the Enlightenment period, kind of starting, kind of you can almost say during the time, a little bit during and a little bit after the bubonic plagues that ravaged Europe, right? Where you had this disease unraveling the existing social order of the church control over the people because of the labor shortage, because of the high amounts of deaths. You started noticing bargaining power amongst the peasant class, more than you ever saw before. So because the lords who depended upon their land to be worked in order to keep the feudal structure alive realized that there's essentially, even though we're all dying, we need workers. But they weren't importing workers, they still had a limited scope of workers. Therefore, the workers who remained, who survived, had more rights. And they started educating themselves. And this is also with the introduction of Gutenberg's printing press. So therefore, you started having a lot more of the peasantry learn how to read for the first time. So when you have worker empowerment, education, you start getting the emergence of a proto middle class, the early bourgeoisie class. And then with that, they start challenging the existing religious and social structures, and they start questioning church and religion and God and Jesus. And they started promoting radical art. You can almost say like the works of Harmonius Bosch and some of the Italian greats was almost kind of subversive, even though it was in many cases paying nods to religious iconography. It was like they had to kind of be tongue in cheek and underhanded about kind of putting in subversive, boundary pushing sort of things because the Catholic Church at the time still had a lot of control over the people, but people were becoming smarter. And one way how they were becoming smarter was unraveling the ancient secrets of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the Greeks, and the Romans, right? Because you had these peasants in the Middle Ages living amongst the ruins of the ancient Greeks and Romans without understanding where it really came from. But as people became more literate, they started actually learning how to decipher those ancient mysteries. And you had this whole notion of like the enlightened man, basically. And as you had the rise of the Enlightenment period, people talking about individual rights, the ability to question the church, basically, early punk, Rage Against the Machine type stuff or whatever. You also simultaneously had the rise of the banking class. So a bank comes from the Italian word banco. Banco means bench. So in medieval Europe, in medieval Italy, a lot of business transactions were done in courtyards on benches, right? Kind of in the plazas on benches, right? So this is where a lot of the business deals were coming through, right? For example, you give me some furs and some pelts, I'll make sure that you get a trunk of freshly mined Austrian salts, or I get some more, you give me some Spanish gold, or find me some of the Far East spices that I keep hearing about that is, the rave amongst the 1% or something, right? A lot of those banks, which are essentially at first pawn shops because banks weren't allowed to issue loans at interest. Otherwise, they would be violating the Catholic and Christian doctrine of usury, charging at interest. Um, Many of the early banks were essentially just pawn shops. In other words, you give me something, I can't charge you for it, but I'm going to hold your stuff as collateral, knowing that you can't pay it back. I'm not going to charge you interest. I'm just going to say you owe me this amount of money. And then when I know you can't pay it back, I keep your stuff and then I resell it at a higher profit. And this is one of the reasons why Jews in Europe were so needed by the municipal governments and royal courts is because they were allowed to charge at interest, because the Catholic rule of usury did not apply to them, which actually engendered a lot of envy and rage amongst Europeans against Jews, and is one of the reasons why there was so much violence against the Jews, such as the York massacres in England, the Rhineland massacres during the First Crusade, in which Godfrey of Bouillon and other French and Belgian and Dutch and German nobles on their way to the Holy Land marched along the Rhine River in the Palatinates or Palatine, I believe, and were massacring Jews on their religious crusade. And then also the Inquisitions in Spain that forced a lot of Jews to convert to Catholicism or forced being tortured to death. And this is not even scratching the surface of all the Eastern European pogroms that were going on against the Jews over there. So the thing about this period of time for this history lesson is that capitalism arose alongside Enlightenment type stuff, right? But you had a lot of proto theories that would eventually become what we consider to be socialism and come eventually what would become capitalism. But they're essentially all from the same kind of parental seedling of this kind of Enlightenment period. It's just they have different means to an end. The capitalists that favored more of the newly emergent bourgeoisie, middle class, merchant class, kind of believes that individual businesses are the way to the utopian future, whereas the socialists descended from the still working class peasantry of this kind of Enlightenment period, believe that more working in communion with each other, being in community with each other, and kind of disregarding these kind of modernist concepts of kind of an economy, econometrics, and all these type of things would lead to a more utopian state, a world beyond scarcity and things of that nature, a world where everybody had certain claim to the public domain in the commons, is what they would call it. So they're both the same but different means to an end. Both capitalism and socialism both have utopian means to them. So it's interesting that when capitalists like to say that socialism doesn't work, that's not actually true. It's actually certain theories within socialism have proven that they can't work, but it's not because they didn't work, it's because they were actively in hostility towards capitalist, colonialist, imperialist forces that try to undermine them at every single step. And when you're under attack by somebody, you're essentially forced to metastasize into a military dictatorship in which you're spending more money on weapons than bread, butter, and grain and other resources for your population. So it's some deep stuff, man. But so there's that. And let me see here. I think so. And that's the thing too, and that's what these sorry. So to finish up that point, that's what Donald Trump represents. Donald Trump represents the 1% trying to race to the finish line by destroying Western democratic governments in exchange for global, borderless, right-wing, corporate, private army mercenary groups, global fascism. This is why you have Eric Prince with Blackwater and Frontier Services Group. And the Chinese are even on it too. So that's just it. All of these tensions between, the USA and Russia and China or this or that. The truth is that there is a large contingent of Chinese people in the Communist Party who want more freedom to do the exploitation that American industrialists are allowed to do. So there's factions within the Communist Party, right? Because the Chinese Communist government is not really a Marxist-Leninist thing anymore, or Maoist experiment. It's really totalitarianism overseeing corporatism. Like that's why you have these Chinese corporations. Like they operate as kind of free market businesses of profit, supply, demand, scarcity, things of that nature, profit, all that. But the main shareholders in each company is the Communist Party. So it's kind of like China through globalism and needing to adapt and actually enrich the West in the United States, because they were basically creating the little cheap things, the things that we need at cheap prices with Chinese slave labor effectively. Now that they're rich now, you're starting to notice that their state is withering away. There's internal struggles between people in the Communist Party, but they too, some of those people have a vested interest in this global fascist network. They're, and that's why you have Guo Wengui. Because Guo Wengui, for example, if we rewind backwards, who is an ally and a friend of fellow scam artist Steve Bannon, is that it was proven that Guo Wengui had ties to the Chinese state security apparatus. And the reason why Guo Wengui fled the United States, or sorry, fled China, not because he was being persecuted by Chinese for being a freedom-loving person. Rather, Guo Wengui fled because he was caught in a bribery scandal trying to bribe Chinese Communist Party real estate magnates in order for them to basically sell him state property so he could resell it for his own profit and split the difference with the Chinese corrupt bureaucrats, when the actual hardliners, the auditors, the people about the revolution, found out what he was doing, he was forced to flee. But he seems to have made some sort of deal in exile with the Chinese government, and it's speculated that that deal was he would create this fake anti-communist dissident movement to basically fish for the people, the Chinese expatriates who were against the Chinese government, so he could give that information to the Chinese. In other words, he was pretending to be a patriot to attract these other Chinese patriots in order to basically take their information and give it to the Chinese government, so the Chinese government could persecute their families in China, their relatives, but also keep tabs and spy on them as well, or eventually co-opt them if need be to do more continued deep mining and spying in the United States. Total four-dimensional chess type stuff going on, right? But then again, this Guo Wengui guy, not only was he a double agent who professed his love for the Communist Party in wiretap conversations, he was also kind of playing both sides, because if he were to be killed or assassinated by the Chinese, it would prove that the Chinese government was using him or has some relationship with him, and that would be a diplomatic nightmare for the Chinese government. So it's kind of like he was playing both sides, really. So, and the Americans were probably trying to use him for intelligence. So this one corrupt crook, who was actually accused of also sexual assault in China, was able to position himself in a way where he was able to just play both sides of the field. And the thing too is that the people he was talking to in China, most likely spying, giving the information of the people he was spying upon in the United States back to the Chinese, that faction he was working for in China are that faction of pro-corporate communists who want more power away from the traditional hardliners. So the thing is that, so in Guo Wengui, right, when he's on Voice of America, remember, at the behest of Michael Pack of the Claremont Institute, the same people who push the birther conspiracy stuff, when he goes on Voice of America, Guo Wengui essentially has to act that he hates China, but he kind of does hate China because he hates the Chinese in their current manifestation via the CCP, right? But he was doing such a good job of spreading disinformation about the Chinese government that the faction of pro-corporate Chinese communists in the Communist Party told him to cool it, because they were getting heat for what he was doing. In other words, he was doing such a good job of seeming anti-China in order for his cover to not be blown, that it was kind of getting his handlers in this one faction in trouble with the hardliners in the Communist Party. Insane stuff. But what I'm trying to say too is, to kind of finish up that point, is in this global right-wing fascist network I'm talking about, you also have the Chinese, you have the Hong Kongs, you have Hong Kong, Taiwanese, and even possibly within China itself, the kind of anti-CCP hardliner factions, who are kind of by proxy in cahoots with this global right-wing fascist network, because they're thinking about their sovereignty, but at the same time, their sovereignty is actually going to jeopardize potentially the democracies of the West. And this is how world wars start. World wars start when you have so many players with so many vested interests themselves, that the only thing to do is to just duke it out and just say, to the winner keeps the spoils type thing. And that's the type of world that we're living in. And if you notice, the world we live in right now, post 2008 financial crises and everything like that, in which you saw the rise of Tea Party on the right, Occupy on the left, a lot more of the populism in Europe, such as the Golden Dawn Party, neo-Nazi party in Greece, the National Front, or I think the National Party or something in France of Marine Le Pen gained a lot more power during the recession era. The Northern or Lombard League in Italy, I believe, who I believe gave us Meloni, the current far-right prime minister of Italy. Alternative for Germany and the ADP in Germany made a lot of strides. You notice that when the global economy imploded, and then also the wars by America, NATO, and Russia, and the terrorists in the Middle East caused the refugee crisis, you started planting the seeds for the destruction of democracy, people losing faith in it, and therefore the soil becomes conducive for fascism. And that fascism, gives us the new wave of Hitler's, Mussolini's, Hirohito's, Tito's, Stalin's, etc., right? And you start laying the foundation for global conflict, unfortunately. And that's what Donald Trump represents. He is the American version of our role in the destruction of democracy, which is why Donald Trump can't win, because he represents the destruction of democracy. And their whole goal is to start the business plot. So I've been talking a little bit, so I'm going to take a break real quick. All right, I'm back. So let's get to this, right? So the business plot. So the business plot, also called the Wall Street push, and push is very similar to what the Nazis did at the beer hall push, right? Or the White House push, was a political conspiracy in 1933 in the United States to overthrow the government of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and install Smedley Butler as dictator. Butler, a retired Marine Corps Major General, testified under oath that wealthy businessmen were plotting to create a fascist veterans organization with him as his leader and use it in a coup d'etat to overthrow Roosevelt. In 1934, let me make sure my volume's good. Okay, in 1934, I'll blow it up for you a little bit. All right, in 1934, Butler testified under oath before the United States House of Representatives Special Committee on Un-American Activities, the McCormick-Dickstein Committee, on these revelations. Although no one was prosecuted, the Congressional Committee final report said, "There is no question that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution when and if the financial backers deemed it expedient." So early in the committee's gathering of testimony, most major news media dismissed the plot, with a New York Times editorial categorizing it as a quote-unquote gigantic hoax. Which is interesting, though, who owns the newspapers back then? You know, the Hearst, all these like rich people and stuff like that. You know, Rosebud from Citizen Kane. So when the committee's final report was released, the Times said the committee, quote unquote, purported to report that a 2-month investigation had convinced it that General Butler's story of a fascist march on Washington was alarmingly true, and also alleged that definite proof had been found that the much publicized fascist march on Washington, that was to have been led by Major General Smedley retired, according to testimony at a hearing, was actually contemplated. Right? So peep this, right? Check this out. Alright, I'm going to play a video of some of the January 6th stuff because that kind of relates to what happened during January 6th because of Donald Trump.
Video of the battle between rioters and Capitol Police on January 6th. The video is graphic evidence of the violence behind an attempt to influence the outcome of the 2020 election. Jessica Snyder reports.
A 3-hour video just released by the Justice Department after CNN and other outlets sued for access shows one of the most violent and prolonged battles between Capitol Police and the pro-Trump mob. The video, taken from a Capitol security camera on the Lower West Terrace, does not have sound, but it shows how dozens of rioters moved in on Capitol Police, spraying the cops who stood guard with pepper spray, pointing strobing flashlights at them, striking them with batons and flagpoles. More than an hour in, when police push back, you can see a helmet knocked off of one officer's head. The video release comes as the House committee investigating January 6th prepares to ramp up its probe in the new year. Chairman Benny Thompson tells the Washington Post he's focusing on then-President Trump's actions, zeroing in on this video he released 187 minutes after the riot began.
You have to go home now.
Thompson telling the Post, it appears that he tried to do a taping several times, but he wouldn't say the right thing. Thompson now saying Trump's delayed response could be a factor in deciding whether to make a criminal referral, possibly for obstructing the Electoral College proceedings, and that other Trump officials could also face referrals for pressuring local and state election officials to overturn the results.
The men and women of the New York City Police Department.
Former New York City Police Commissioner and Trump ally Bernie Kerik is saying any cooperation he provides to the committee must be made public. Kerik now says he'll post subpoena documents online and that he wants to testify at a public hearing. Kerik worked alongside Trump's former attorney Rudy Giuliani after the election to discredit the results and attended a meeting at the Willard Hotel with other Trump allies on January 5th to discuss how to keep Trump in office. Meanwhile, committee member Pete Aguilar says they hope the Supreme Court acts fast to rule on releasing documents from Trump's White House.
So the courts have already ruled in our favor. Our anticipation is that the Supreme Court will uphold that ruling in an expedited manner.
No word on how quickly the Supreme Court will decide.
Here. We're going to give riot warning. We're going to try to get compliance, but this is now effectively a riot.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
5 to 50, be advised, Capitol Police 1 advised they're trying to breach and get to the Capitol.
We have a breach of the Capitol! Breach of the Capitol! We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need court support. We lost the line. We lost the line. All MPDs get back. All MPDs get back up to the upper deck. All MPDs get back to the upper deck.
peaceful people. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love, the love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
All right, so that was the January 6th footage. So let's go back to the business plot. Right? So they found evidence, according to this, that the business plot was not a hoax, but was actually true. So Butler and the veterans. So on July 17th, 1932, thousands of World War I veterans converged on Washington, D.C., set up tent camps, and demanded immediate payment of bonuses due to them according to the World War Adjustment Compensation Act of 1924, which made certain bonuses initially due no later than 1925 and all no later than 1945. Walters W. Walters, a former Army sergeant, led the bonus army. It was encouraged by an appearance of retired Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler, a popular figure of the time. A few days after Butler's arrival, President Herbert Hoover ordered the marchers removed from the U.S. Army cavalry troops under the command of General Douglas MacArthur destroyed their camps. So shacks erected by the bonus army on the Anacostia Flats burning after being set afire by the U.S. military in 1932. So the thing is that the January 6 people, they're not noble like these veterans who were just trying to storm to get their bonuses and stuff from World War I. Rather, the people working for Trump understand history, read history, and were trying to co-opt the energy of the business plot, in order to get Donald Trump back into power. Therefore, a major key in this global turning a crucial key in this global right-wing fascist new world order I'm talking about. So Butler, although he a self-described Republican, responded by supporting Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1932 election, right? So by 1933, Butler started denouncing capitalism and bankers, going on to explain that for 33 years he had been the high-class muscle man for Wall Street, the bankers, and the business class, labeling himself a racketeer for capitalism. So Smedley Butler was very notable for helping to overthrow a lot of the Latin American countries. So he was like the Marine leader doing a lot of those overthrows that helped United Fruit and Chiquita Banana and all those type of stuff, like take over Latin America, right? In the kind of after the Teddy Roosevelt, was it big stick diplomacy, Panama Canal acquisition, meddling in Haiti, annexation of Cuba. Essentially, the United States actually militarily enforcing the old Monroe Doctrine by saying that not only is this our backyard and foreign powers can't meddle, we can also exploit it at our own whim, based on the 1% industrial classes in the United States. And many of these industrialists are still the people funding Donald Trump, their descendants and their families. So reaction to Roosevelt. Roosevelt's election was upsetting for many conservative businessmen of the time, as his campaign promised that the government would provide jobs for all the unemployed had the reverse effect of creating a new wave of unemployment by businessmen frightened by years of socialism and reckless government spending. Some writers have said concerns over the gold standard were also involved. Jules Archer, in The Plot to Seize the White House, wrote that with the end of the gold standard, conservative financiers were horrified. They viewed a currency not solidly backed by gold as inflationary, undermining both private and business fortunes and leading to national bankruptcy. Roosevelt was damned as a socialist or communist out to destroy private business by sapping the gold backing wealth in order to subsidize the poor. In other words, they held on to the gold, so therefore, if gold wasn't the de facto currency, a lot of what they held would kind of lose value, is what they feared. And the money, the paper money backed by their gold, they fear would lose value through inflation. But the thing is that the rich actually own both sides of the equation. You know what I'm saying? They're able to use gold fear and speculating, which is what you notice a lot of even modern right wing pundits, even Patrick Bet-David with like his gold scam, like 1-800 buymygoldcoins.com BS type stuff, right? They own the gold, but they also overwhelmingly own the actual paper money supply and all the equities in the stock market. So essentially, the entire earth is just hedging the richest portfolio. When things are bad, gold goes up. When things are good, gold goes down, stocks goes up, and they own it all across the board. And there's no sense in going to the gold standard because the gold standard will be deflationary. In other words, there wouldn't be enough gold to prop up and justify the lifestyles that we're accustomed to in the modern world that's ran by deficit financing. It would be like putting a belt on, it would be like putting a size 0 belt of like a skinny model on like a morbidly obese person and saying good luck, have fun breathing. But this is kind of what it was. So there's more on Smedley Butler and stuff like that too, I'll talk about here in a minute. But let me do something here. So this is kind of what they want to do, right? So kind of in summary so far, because I know we've been talking for a long time, is that we started off with Michael Flynn talking about digital armies in his fourth dimension warfare agenda, insurgency, to help create chaos online in support of the Republicans, right? So a lot of the stuff on Instagram that you see are most likely ran by the organizations, either not directly by Jack Persovic or Michael Flynn, but also Trump-allied Russians, Trump-allied Israelis, Trump-allied British people involved in the Cambridge Analytica scam, but then also possibly even Hong Kong, Taiwan-based, or even mainland China anti-communist CCP dissidents. And I'm not saying that they're right for wanting freedom, but I'm saying, but the Chinese inclusion into this global fascist plot is that they're willing to, they want success by essentially helping to lay the dynamite that's going to cause the next world war, in my opinion, as democracies unravel and you have strongman leaders overseeing a global economy that's no longer a global economy. It's essentially countries just competing over scarce resources in a world where there's already talks about water scarcity and water wars. There's already talk about the fight over lithium and iridium and radium and all the chemicals and minerals that goes into batteries for electric vehicles. And even for dirty energy like coal and oil, there's still going to be fights and everything. Because even though there's an abundance of oil, Russia has oil, Venezuela has oil, the Guyanas and Suriname have oil. The United States is actually a net exporter of oil. We pump a lot of oil, and rather than selling it to ourselves at discount, we sell it to others at profit. There's still oil in Norway. There's still a little bit of oil in the North Sea being mined, pumped through deep sea drilling by the British. We're finding oil. Angola is rich with oil. Angola is basically ran by oil companies. Nigeria, OPEC member, oil country. So not only you're going to have conflicts over the green energy revolution, you're going to have conflicts over people still trying to maintain the dirty energy economy. But because there's an abundance of oil, they want to make sure that their oil is essentially at the top of the shelf, at eye view of shoppers and consumers. So they're even going to compete with each other over that. So what we're seeing is the unraveling of democracy because of all these various parties, and the MAGA administration in the United States is kind of like the essential key in turning it. Because if you can get the predominant hegemony, unipolar power to consent to this unraveling, it will empower Russia. It will empower ethno-state Netanyahu, genocide of the Gazans, and illegal annexation of the West Bank. Netanyahu, they're trying to. Netanyahu is already trying to slip in notes about trying to go to war with Iran, and we have to remember that Sheldon Adelson, the late husband of Miriam Adelson, both whom are Trump mega donors, Sheldon Adelson actually said without even guilt that he wants to drop a nuclear weapon on Iran. And I know, so I'm an American, I'm a proud American. I don't want to see Donald Trump hurt. I don't want to see any American hurt. I know which side I'm on. I don't care about Iran, China, Russia, England, Israel, any of them. I care about the humans there, but as far as their governments are concerned, I know which government I serve and I stand for. And what I mean by serve is I'm not actively working for the government, but I know when called, I would have to defend this country if need be. But it's just fascinating that this is what's happening, and we're letting it happen. And even the Christians are letting it happen because the Christians have a vested interest. They want to see doomsday. They want to see end times. They want to see the comeback of Jesus or something, right? So they're willing to push us to World War whatever, with it's interesting. And a lot of people might say that, oh, well, it's the Democrats trying to push for conflict with Ukraine or something because Russia has nuclear weapons. Then again, that whole argument falls flat because we beat Russia already. It's Russia who doesn't know when to throw in the towel. Russia probably could have been already in NATO, already could have been involved with the West and EU if they had wanted to be. They're the ones who unilaterally invaded Crimea. They're the ones who invaded Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine or whatever. They're the ones over here potentially threatening the Baltic countries and everything. They're the ones over here, obsessed with the Slovakia Gap and everything like that in the Eastern Europe and everything. They're the ones over here assassinating people and over here with their online disinformation campaigns. They're as hostile as we're hostile, but what I'm saying, but they're already lost. What I'm saying? And they're actively supporting China. They're the biggest exporter of their gas to China. It seems like, sure, we can make the argument that Democrats are more anti-Russian and the Republicans are both anti-China, but it's kind of irrelevant because they're both allies anyway. And Russia can't really be trusted because you just don't know which side they're going to choose. One day they seem like they're pro-West, the other day they're funding Iran. The next day they seem like they're pro-West, the next thing you know, they're sending their submarines to Venezuela and Cuba. It's a complicated game. They're almost like, in other words, we kind of know where the Chinese stand. When it comes to Russia, they're always trying to play things into their favor by playing both sides as if these larger powers don't know what they're doing. But let me see here. So let me play this real quick, just so we can stay on track of how insane Republicans have gotten. This is Donald Trump saying that he could shoot someone and not lose voters. So put it this way, I'm glad that Donald Trump is okay after the failed assassination attempt on his life. What I'm saying? It's my personal opinion that that young man who shot Donald Trump was probably a black-pilled accelerationist. What I mean by that is, there's no way of 100% knowing, but we know that he was a registered Republican, but he was still young, and certain states kind of require you to register. So he most likely grew up in a conservative community and household where his natural predisposition was to check Republican. However, there were some Act Blue receipts supposedly talking about how he donated to a liberal cause. However, donating to a liberal cause doesn't necessarily mean that you're a liberal. It might just mean that you're a Republican who's liberal on a subject or one topic, right? You have to be rational here. Not everybody's, equally red, hard blue. There's a lot of purple in between. So I think that we had a young man coming to grips with his own political awakening, living in a 4chan, 8chan, black-pilled world of nihilism. He was probably bullied, shamed, probably not the best with women and everything like that. And like most men, regardless of whether they're, attractive or unattractive or cool or not cool or whatever, he was horny. He was a young, horny, confused guy who probably didn't have a lot of success and everything like that, probably thinking that he didn't have a lot of prospects in life, probably because he's been brainwashed by, a lot of, men have insecurities too. How you always talk about women with eating disorders because of bikini models. Men feel the same way in certain cases. Men feel, how do you think a lot of boys feel when they see Bugattis and all these fake people in Dubai and ballers, when really they realize that they can't do that? You know what I'm saying? And a lot of those people are just phony fake anyway. So we have this young black-pilled man, in my personal opinion, who wanted to basically create chaos. And therefore, he's an accelerationist. He thought that probably by taking out Donald Trump as an anarchist, who doesn't really have a clear ideology, that A, he would go down in history as the Gavrilo Princip who started World War III or the American Revolution. And yeah, that's kind of what it is. It's like he would be remembered, but then he would also cause the acceleration in the destruction of the world he felt rejected him. That's what I personally think, that young man, why he did it. But the sad truth is that Republicans want to blame it on Democrats, therefore emboldening their pretext for civil war that they've already been threatening us with. It's just interesting. It's like, instead of trying to find the most rational solution, of course the conservatives want to basically make it into some sort of, struggle between us versus them, in group versus out group, red versus blue, blue versus red, whatever. When really that could have been, I don't know. It's just interesting. Like, that could have been a moment where, sure, we united around the fact that, yes, we're glad Donald Trump's okay, but at the same time, a lot of the nihilism and black pill stuff is indelibly kind of in part MAGA. You have a lot of that doomer stuff on the left too. I'm not trying to say that it's just the right. You have a lot of that pessimism on the right, on the left, but you have that also on the right wing too. But regardless, I think it was just a young lost man who was black pilled, didn't really know who he was, who wanted probably to self-delete himself anyway, but he figured that, A, if I'm going to self-delete myself, why not self-delete myself without actually me pulling the trigger? I could become famous if I pull this off, and then I can almost cause chaos and anarchy. In other words, he was going for a triple: off himself without offing himself, hurt or kill or maim the president, and then, or former president, and I hope he's never president again, Donald Trump, and then also cause chaos. And he almost kind of got that. And largely, in other words, put it this way, conservatives unilaterally blaming the left for what happened to Donald Trump is actually giving the shooter probably what he wanted, once you think this stuff through.
The people, my people are so smart. And you know what else they say about my people? The polls. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible. No, they say, Trump, we love you too, man. Trump's voters are by far, I'm at 68, 69%. I'm at 90% total. Like, what else they say about my people? The polls. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
And you can kind of tell in that Donald Trump is even surprised how gullible his own followers are, how rabid they are. He's just like, these people just gave me all this power to do and say whatever I want. Like, that's even the moment I think he realized that's when the power really got to his head. He really got to his head, and it got worse and worse and worse. And it led to January 6th. You're more likely to hear Democrats talk bad about other Democrats than you are Republicans to ever fall out of line and talk bad about Republicans. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of crazy. Like that's the thing about the left is, and I've said this before, the left has to actually balance things. Like the left wing rather has a hard time as compared to the right wing, because the right wing is monolithic. It's predominantly white, male, patriarchal, heteronormative, conservative, capitalist, anti-government, anti-modernity, though exploiting and using modernity to their favor and everything like that. They support supremacy while simultaneously alleging that they're victims in order to, preemptively strike and keep people down who are outsider groups. The thing about the left wing is that they have to basically regulate. It's hard because they're receiving corporate money, but then they're also trying to regulate their corporate donors. Whereas Republicans can just not regulate their donors because they don't care for worker rights. In other words, the Democrats are like a referee party between the business class and the worker class, whereas the Republicans are explicitly the business class. And as a result, you have a lot more diversity of thought within the left wing naturally. Therefore, that's why you always have, the far left saying that, oh, Democrats aren't doing enough, they're not keeping it real enough, they're not down enough. And then you have, the center left, kind of scapegoating losses in the polls on the far left because they're too radical and they're bipolar and dismissive. You'll never hear Republicans say a person can be too far right and they're dismissive. You'll rarely hear them say in a public town hall event or as a guest on CNN that, hey, we've gone too far. You'll hear the Pelosi's and all that talk about the left all day, the far left all day, because they even jeopardize her wealth and power through her insider stock tradings and all that type of stuff. So in other words, the Democrats always have to practice self-restraint and muzzling, whereas the Republicans are just able to just do whatever they want. It's insane. So we covered a lot here, and what I want to do is I want to play this, right? So this goes back to the digital army thing of Michael Flynn, right? And before I go on, 1 minute here actually. Okay, so we talked about how Michael Flynn was talking about his digital armies, right? So Michael Flynn was not only incriminated in the Russiagate stuff, but his brother Charles Flynn was in the war room during the January 6th insurrection. So let's see what we have to say about him. So this is Charles Flynn. So he's the brother of Michael Flynn. Let me see here. Here we go. So during the 2001 storming of the United States Capitol, a conference call took place between Capitol Police, DC officials, and Pentagon officials. In that call, the chief of the Capitol Police made an immediate request for National Guard assistance. So the Capitol Chief Police called the Pentagon asking for National Guard assistance, telling them he needed boots on the ground. However, Lieutenant General Walter E. Pyatt, director of Army Staff, said he could not recommend the request be approved. initially denying his involvement, and the army later confirmed that Flynn had participated in the phone call, although it claimed he could not remember if he said anything on the critical call about deploying the National Guard. But others on the call reported to hearing his voice. In early December 2021, Colonel Earl G. Matthews released a memo that accused Flynn of making willful distortions of the events of 6 January, describing Flynn and Pyatt as absolute and unmitigated liars, and giving perjured testimony before Congress. Charles Flynn's role drew scrutiny in light of his brother Michael's recent calls for martial law and to redo election overseen by the military. Wow, right? So it's like so the Capitol Police called the Pentagon, and then this Walter E. Pyatt guy, director of the Army staff, said he couldn't do it. But then allegedly Charles Flynn was heard also on the call. But then one of their co-workers and contemporaries, a lower level Colonel Earl Matthews, said that they were both lying. So it's like they tried to delay the National Guard from coming in so the Capitol rioters could basically take over the government and hang Mike Pence. And then, they were also like stealing laptops. And there was that Riley June Williams of what's her name? Riley June Williams of Pennsylvania, who tried to steal Nancy Pelosi's laptop and sell it to Russia. So more of the Russian connection in there. So Riley June Williams, she was sentenced. So this was some wild stuff here. And then you have this Walter E. Pyatt guy. So which is so interesting. So okay. So now he's the CEO of the Wounded Warrior Project, which is a noble cause and everything like that. But then again, it gives you a possible Trump insider more with the veteran community to push those pro-Trump, pro-fascist, right-wing. It's always the woke agenda's fault. It's always leftist fault. It's always worker unions' fault type thing in order to brainwash the very pro-gun military people. So prior to 6 January 2021, Pentagon officials repeatedly asked city and federal officials if they needed assistance from the DC National Guard, but only the mayor of DC requested assistance from 340 unarmed service members. At approximately 2 p.m. on January 6, Lieutenant General Pyatt joined a phone call with Washington, D.C. leaders, Capitol Police leaders, the D.C. National Guard, and other as the riot at the Capitol was unfolding. The Hill reported that Pyatt said on the call that Secretary of the Army Ryan D. McCarthy was meeting with the Secretary of Defense Christopher C. Miller to seek approval to request the assistance. He also explained that he was not the decision maker and that no one was denying the request for assistance. The New York Times reported that during congressional testimony on February 23, 2021, former Capitol security leaders provided conflicting accounts of the request for National Guard, reflecting the confusion of the event and the complexity of requesting Guard assistance. So on 6 January 2021, during the storming of the United States Capitol, and an hour and a half after the West Side defensive perimeter had been breached, according to Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund and DC National Guard leader Major General William J. Walker, Pyatt critically delayed or ignored Sund's request for National Guard support, stating, "I don't like the visual of the National Guard standing with police with the Capitol in the background," which is so interesting that when there was like left-wing protests, they were armed to the teeth. So despite this being a stark contrast to the protests of the previous year, according to the Washington Post, Pyatt initially denied Sund's allegations in a statement, but acknowledged in a call with reporters about 2 weeks later that he had conferred with others who were present that it was possible he made comments to that effect. on March 8th, 2021, retired Army Lieutenant General Russell Hoare, whom House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat California, tasked with leading the security review, identified the U.S. Capitol Police are too understaffed, insufficiently equipped, and inadequately trained, and woefully lacking in intelligence capabilities. So on June 15th, 2021, Piat told the House Committee on Oversight and Reform that Army officials all immediately understood the gravity of the situation. After receiving a request in a conference call for quote-unquote urgent and immediate support at the Capitol, but they still needed to develop a plan. Piat acknowledged that quote-unquote those on the line were convinced that I was denying their request, despite me clearly stating 3 times that we are not denying your request. We need to prepare a plan for when the Secretary of the Army gains approval. In other words, it's not my fault. We got to wait for the Secretary of the Army to give the thumbs up. I can't unilaterally do that. And I wouldn't be surprised, and this is just speculation, that just knowing how clever Steve Bannon and those guys are, and all the backdoor dealings and rooms and meetings and DC insiders that wanted Trump to win, I wouldn't be surprised if they knew they had that convenient excuse already pre-planned. In other words, we can delay the Capitol riot because the person who they're going to call, even though we think he has authority, he can always default authority to the actual Secretary of the Army, who was not currently able to be gotten a hold of for whatever reason. So on November 16, 2021, the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General released their findings on the actions that took place to prepare for and respond to protests at the Capitol. The report concluded that the actions the DoD took before January 6, 2021 to prepare for the planned protests in Washington, D.C. on January 5th and 6th were appropriate. So in early December 2021, Colonel Earl G. Matthews, a Trump appointee, that's very important, right, released a rebuttal to the DoD IG report that accused LTG Piat, Lieutenant General Piat, of making willful distortions of the events of January 6, describing Piat and General Charles A. Flynn, brother of Michael Flynn of the Digital Army, as an absolute and unmitigated liars, and of giving a perjured testimony. So think about it this way. Piat was once the leading candidate to take over as the commanding general of the United States Army's Futures Command, and appointment to the rank of general. He had received the recommendation from several top defense officials. However, he was rejected by President Biden due to his handling of National Guard deployment during the January 6th Capitol attacks, right? So that's interesting. So President rejected him going from a lieutenant general to a general, right? So I'm sure this Walter Piat guy is real salty about that. And I guarantee you, because he's the leader of the Wounded Warrior Project, that he probably is in cahoots behind some clandestine, infiltration type stuff to influence possibly the 2024 election. I wouldn't be surprised. I would not put it past him. Yeah. So that's actually some good information there. So I'm going to take a break real quick. Alright, so this is going to be a video about Jack Posobiec, who is behind In Wokeness, most likely. And this kind of involves the whole digital army of the right-wing fascist New World Order kind of movement, with people such as former General Michael Flynn, the brother, interestingly, of Charles Flynn, who was involved possibly in denying or delaying National Guard assistance during the January 6 attacks, in which Donald Trump tried to overthrow the government because he didn't win.
Account and wokeness. The X account and wokeness is a politically charged account that frequently engages and posts about social, cultural, and political issues. The account mainly focuses on criticizing woke culture, which typically refers to a set of progressive, liberal, or left-leaning ideals related to social justice, race, gender, and other identity politics. The tone of these tweets from End Wokeness tends to be provocative, controversial, and sometimes outright lies. Now, this is probably going to get shared a lot, so allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ryan McBeth. I'm a software engineer and director of integration for the Texas Aero Med Lab. This company uses AI-powered drones to deliver whole blood to wounded soldiers, so I know a little bit about software and artificial intelligence. In a previous job, I wrote C4ISR software for the military, which is basically software that finds bad guys. And once I found those bad guys, I would give the information to my client, which would, well, you get the idea. So I'm really good at using technology to find bad guys. I first encountered this End Wokeness account in December of 2022, when the account posted a picture of American Vice President Kamala Harris surrounded by Air Force servicemen with the caption, "Is this what our military actually looks like?" And you know, before I wrote software, I was a heavy weapons infantryman who retired after 20 years. I'm an Irish Protestant, and I served with Mormons and African-American Muslims, and we were all brothers. And this post just rubbed me wrong. So I made a video about it. And over the course of the next 2 years, I made 2 more videos correcting this End Wokeness account for spreading misinformation, or in some cases disinformation, or outright lies. And this account has grown by leaps and bounds over the past few years. Elon Musk, the owner of X, has even interacted with the account on previous occasions. And this scared me a little, because this account is essentially a fire hose of fake news, of disinformation and misinformation. Now, normally I wouldn't care, right? It's just some dude in his mom's basement, or maybe yet another Russian psyop like this dude. And by the way, you can see my evidence for this Russian psyop below. And then I was invited to the 2024 Disaster and Emergency Response Conference to present on how to counter disinformation during a disaster. And I had to write a paper in order to present at this particular conference. And one of the examples I cited was the term Hawaii, not Ukraine. See, back in August of 2023, lightning caused a wildfire on Maui, the Hawaiian island of Maui. And about 100 casualties resulted from that fire, and many, many homes were burned to the ground. And in that month, there just so happened to be an American congressional delegation traveling to Ukraine. So there was this narrative that was started by Russian bots that we are sending millions of dollars to Ukraine, but Hawaiians who were affected by wildfires were only receiving $700 payments. This was a lie. It was an outright lie. FEMA was granted cash assistance for something called critical needs assistance, which basically provides a one-time payment of $700 to address immediate needs like food, water, clothing, stuff that got burned up. And then you come back the next day and you apply for your actual relief. But End Wokeness implied that this was all that people were getting. With this tweet, "I think Joe Biden should take his $700 and get back on the effing planes." And this lie was seen over 2 million times.
Boarding passes?
Check.
Kids?
Check. Do we get upgraded?
Let me check.
And the fact that End Wokeness would spread this Russian-supported lie, well, that's when I decided to figure out who this guy really was. Is the account Russian? Is the account American? Is the account somewhere in between? And I can say with pretty good confidence I know who runs the account. Hey, you know I said I was going to Australia for a conference? Well, it's like a 15-hour trip. So you know I'm going to be getting internet. Now, Qantas Internet is powered by Viasat. And yes, that's the same Viasat that has come under cyber attack before. And that's why when I travel, I use PIA VPN. So click the link in the description below or go to piavpn.com/Macbeth to get 83% off plus 4 months free. Listen, Australia is constantly targeted by Chinese hackers. I actually went and bought a second phone and a second laptop just for this trip. And when I come home, I'm going to reset both of these to factory settings. And when I'm in Australia, I'll use PIA VPN even if I'm on my phone. PIA VPN creates a tunnel between your computer and the public internet that hackers and rogue government agents can't penetrate.
It also lets you look like you're in a different location. I've been really into that Hulu Wu-Tang show. And Hulu might geofence this, so I won't be able to watch it in Australia. But with PIA VPN, I will. So go to piavpn.com/Macbeth or click the link in the description below to get 83% off plus 4 months free. Now let's get back to talking about End Wokeness.
Now, analyzing this account took months of software analysis, and if you want to replicate my work, all of my files are available on ryanmacbeth.substack.com for free. I am a man of science, and good science is reproducible. Note that none of these files contain personal information. This isn't doxing. All the data used to decipher the user behind the Unwokeness account is publicly available. It's just been sitting there for anyone to discover. All the dots are there, you just have to connect them. And anyway, the person behind the account is a public figure. Now, I started with taking down all of the tweets ever sent by the End Wokeness account, and I discovered something odd. The account was created in July of 2022, but its tweet history only goes back to February 8th, 2023. So I looked at the Wayback Machine. And the first tweet was on June 29th, 2022, which was a retweet of journalist Tucker Carlson regarding monkeypox. And oftentimes this is how Russian disinformation accounts get started. They start tweeting popular disinformation accounts like Tucker Carlson, hoping to gain followers. Note that back then, the account called themselves Anti-Woke Warrior. For more about how Russian disinformation bots are born, watch my video on the topic. But then the account starts growing. In just 7 days, from July 29th, 2022 to August 5th, 2022, the account grew to more than 3,000 some followers. In 4 more days, the account followers doubled. Normally, this does not happen without some kind of foreign help. The account grew at an average of 1,700 or so followers per day. Once Elon Musk bought Twitter, it grew at an average of 3,600 followers per day. By February 7th, 2023, on the eve of the State of the Union address, the account had about 586,000 followers. And then the account did something funny. They deleted all their previous tweets. I'm still trying to figure that one out. And maybe it was kind of like the Joker in The Dark Knight. You want to be a force of chaos. But once you have an origin story, you kind of take away some of that mystique. So I pulled down all the tweets from End Wokeness, and I analyzed them. And one word kept coming up. It was the word schlit. And this is kind of an interesting choice of words because people don't tend to use that word all that much. But it is used by 2 major accounts, End Wokeness and Libs of TikTok. Now, Libs of TikTok is also a right-wing anti-woke account, and it's run by a woman named Chaya Radchik. Could Chaya Radchik be End Wokeness? So I downloaded all the tweets from both End Wokeness and Chaya Radchik, and I ran some analysis. Now, in the intelligence community, we call this pattern of life analysis. From this, you can figure out everything from when someone wakes up to when they go to work to when they have lunch. End Wokeness tweets on average 16.5 times per day, with most tweets falling into a band between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Chaya Radchik tends to tweet between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. Note that X converts everything to your local time when viewing a tweet, so I am on the East Coast. I just want you to know that so you can take time zones into account if you do your own analysis. But so here the tweet times, they just don't match up. And if you do a breakdown by day, End Wokeness tends to tweet on weekdays and sometimes on the weekends. Chaya Radchik's tweets fall off a cliff on Saturdays. And note that Chaya Radchik is an Orthodox Jew. Observant Jews who obey the rules of the Jewish Sabbath, which is from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, they don't tend to use electricity on the Sabbath. So I think we can safely discount Chaya Radchik. But keying off that word schlit, I came upon another account, Jack Posobiec. Mr. Posobiec is an American alt-right political activist, television correspondent, and a former United States Navy intelligence officer. Now, analyzing his tweets took a while. The file itself is 22 megabytes. That is a lot of tweets. This guy tweets about 80 times a day, mostly between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. Now, going through the tweets, Mr. Posobiec has 2.5 million followers. End Wokeness has 2.6 million followers. So, why would someone create a new account just to replicate the level of fame or followers that they currently have now? So I almost discounted it until I noticed something else. 9 tweets from End Wokeness contain this character E, which is the Polish letter E, a little E with a tail. Oftentimes, this character is used by End Wokeness as substitution for the English letter E when saying words that could be filtered as dirty or inappropriate by a computer. Some examples are the words murder or stabbed, or another word which is the definition for assault of an intimate nature. So, why the Polish E? Why not a French E or an Albanian E, but a Polish E? So I took a look at Mr. Posobiec's tweets again, and it appears that he uses that character when writing Polish text. It is part of the Polish alphabet. And apparently, Mr. Posobiec speaks both Chinese and Polish. So that probably means he has a Polish keyboard installed on his computer or his phone. In the intelligence community, this is what we call a clue. So then I looked to see if there were any times when End Wokeness retweeted Mr. Posobiec, and I found something interesting.
Vernon Central High School, how may I help you?
I'm calling to help you, actually.
Really? I can use some today.
On one occasion, End Wokeness replied to Mr. Posobiec, and that isn't all that odd. I mean, End Wokeness has replied to libs of TikTok, so it isn't uncommon for one alt-right account to reply to another alt-right account. But End Wokeness also retweeted Mr. Posobiec 5 times. Of those 5 times, all 5, every single time, the time in which Mr. Posobiec tweets and the time in which End Wokeness retweets matches up exactly within 1 second. The odds of this happening are very low. The odds of this happening 5 times are very, very low. For example, on the day Mr. Posobiec tweeted, "Why do ads keep doing this?" he also sent 170 other tweets. So if End Wokeness was like an automated bot that was retweeting everything, why wasn't he tweeting everything else? The only conclusion I can come to is that Mr. Posobiec has 2 phones or 2 Chrome tabs open, one with his End Wokeness personality and one as himself. Sends a tweet as himself, refreshes the screen, retweets. Or perhaps there's an autoresponder bot that's only turned on when specific tweets are sent. So using ICD 203, which is the standard in the intelligence community for evaluating probability, and based on the commonality of writing styles, the topics covered, the special characters, the tweet times, I would say that End Wokeness is likely Jack Posobiec. And this kind of brings me back to the original tweet that caught my attention, the one with Vice President Harris surrounded by Air Force airmen. Mr. Posobiec served 8 years in the Navy, and he knows what our military looks like. He knows that we come from all walks of life. And you know, not everybody in that picture voted for the party that President Harris represents, but who cares? How often do you get a chance to get a picture with the Vice President? So when you take that moment away from them, that just rubs me wrong. So I want to make something perfectly clear to every disinformation agent out there watching this, foreign or domestic. Whether you're in Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, or operating under the banners of a domestic destabilization organization, America is not intimidated by your propaganda. We are at war on the information dominance battlefield, and we will not retreat because we understand the damage that you inflict on the innocent. You would do well to recognize the resolve with which we defend America. We aim for peace, but if you insist on waging a war of state-sponsored propaganda against the United States of America, know this: the truth will prevail, and your legacy will be one of failure and shame. Thank you for watching.
Oh man, I'm so bored! Christ on crutches with a permanent profile. That's because you have the wrong toys! You need a Ryan Macbeth in action figure from the Knife Hand Company. That's right, Ryan Macbeth in action figures go everywhere. Put them on your desk.
Okay, so that was about Jack Posobiec possibly being this in wokeness account. So who is Jack Posobiec? Let's Posobiec. Let's see what else we can find here. So is an American alt-right political activist, television correspondent, presenter, conspiracy theorist, and former U.S. Navy intelligence officer. Posobiec is known for his pro-Donald Trump comments on Twitter and has used white supremacist and anti-Semitic symbols and talking points, including the white genocide conspiracy theory. Very interesting. So he has promoted fake news, including the debunked Pizzagate conspiracy theory, claiming higher-ranking Democrat Party officials were involved in a child exploitation ring. He was also a promoter of the Stop the Steal movement. From 2018 to 2021, Posobiec was employed by OAN One America News Network, a far-right cable news television channel, as a political correspondent and on-air presenter. He left OAN in May 2021 to begin hosting a show for the conservative student organization Turning Point USA and to join conservative news site Human Events as senior editor. So Posobiec was born and raised in Norristown, Pennsylvania, to a family of Polish descent. His parents were both Democrats. He attended Kennedy Kenrick Catholic High School and went to Temple University. While at Temple, he became a chairman of the Temple University College Republicans and started a chapter for Students for Academic Freedom, an organization run by David Horowitz Freedom Center. He also participated in a summer internship for U.S. Senator Rick Santorum and volunteered for U.S. Representative Kurt Weldon's unsuccessful re-election campaign in 2006. He graduated from Temple in 2006 with a double major in political science and broadcast journalism. After graduation, Posobiec worked for the United States Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, China. He played a minor role in the film The Forbidden Kingdom, which was released in 2008. He later worked with WPHT, a conservative talk radio station, and then for the campaign of Steve Johnson in the 2010 Pennsylvania lieutenant gubernatorial election. Posobiec served several years in the United States Navy Reserve from 2010 to 2017, reaching the rank of lieutenant junior grade. He was deployed for 10 months at Guantanamo Navy Base on September 2012. And this is me talking. That would actually be interesting to see if he actually crossed paths with DeSantis, because DeSantis was actually the JAG officer overseeing the forced interrogation campaign at Guantanamo Bay. And I'm curious to see if it was during that time. But he also, back to Posobiec, also worked for ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, where he later worked as a civilian. Interesting. So one of the things that I don't think people realize about ONI is that the Office of Naval Intelligence seems to probably be, out of the main three, like Army, Air Force, and Navy, for some reason seems to be like the strongest. And I want to say that in order for a CIA director to be confirmed, they need to have vetting from the Office of Naval Intelligence. And history has shown that the ONI does have a lot of deep roots with the CIA, such as the case of ex-CIA officer Edwin Wilson, in which Edwin Wilson worked for a task force attached to ONI, but Edwin Wilson was later incriminated for selling C4 explosives to Libya during the Muammar Gaddafi regime back in like the late 80s. It was a huge scandal. So let me see here. Him and Frank Turple and a bunch of rogue CIA agents. So anyways, back to the subject, back to Posobiec. During the 2016 election, Posobiec was a special projects director for Citizens for Trump, a pro-Trump organization, but not an official group. In March 2017, Posobiec resigned from his full-time civilian position at ONI, saying that his work for Trump led to a toxic work environment. As of August 2017, his security clearance was suspended and was under review. Interesting. Huh. what was he up to that would have got his security clearance suspended and put under review? That's a pretty big deal. But so we kind of know who he is. So let me see here. Posobiec was escorted to the event. So he has connections to Laura Loomer, who is like a Zionist right-wing psychopath. He also has ties to Milo Yiannopoulos, who relates to the the Gamergate situation, and the Gamergate situation feeds back to Steve Bannon finding those World of Warcraft angry kids. So when Steve Bannon was ripping off kids by paying Chinese sweatshop laborers to mine in-game trinkets and treasure and upcharging it and reselling it back to the kids, he noticed that there was many angry people in the gamer community, largely because of the pushback that some feminists had on the sexualization of females in gaming. And Milo Yiannopoulos kind of inserted himself to be the hero of the incel gamer community. And that's kind of where Steve Bannon and Milo Yiannopoulos kind of link up, starting Milo's career. And Milo has ties to like Hungarian far right people. Was it Sebastian Gorka? People like that in the Trump administration. So it's all connected. So this guy's crazy. So ties to far-right extremists. Posobiec's social media and political activities are linked to neo-Nazi and white supremacist movements. He published multiple posts containing the white supremacist code 1488, or the 14 words, and supports the use of that slogan. So this goes back to my video on Charlie Kirk, right? The 14 words was created by white supremacist David Eden Lane. David Eden Lane wrote the 14 words, right? Which is, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. And also puts 88, because that's 88 stands for HH, or Heil Hitler. So David Lane was a member of the 1980s white supremacist group, The Order. The Order was founded by a person named Robert J. Matthews. Robert J. Matthews was a member of the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society was founded by Harry or Lynd Bradley, and the Bradley family are intermarried with the Uihlein family, and the Uihlein family are mega Trump donors and also donors to Charlie Kirk, but also to the Young Americans, and also they backed Scott Walker, the former governor, I want to say, of Wisconsin. And Scott Walker, interestingly, is the president of the Young Americans for Freedom. And the Young Americans hosted the event that I showed, in which Michael Flynn was bragging about having a digital army of trolls leading an insurrection online. So a lot of those faceless bot accounts you argue with online or see online, I wouldn't be surprised if these are just like college Republican kids and 8chan users underneath the direction of Michael Flynn leading the kind of digital insurrection. But think about that. We go from Michael Flynn, the Young Americans. Some of their videos were also quoted by Fresh and Fit podcast. The Fresh and Fit podcast, despite being led by two men of African descent, is arguably a far right, manosphere, misogynistic, sexist, dating advice type podcast, right? But they included people such as a guy named Rollo Tomasi. I don't know his real name, but Rollo Tomasi has links to Stefan Molyneux. Stefan Molyneux is controversial because he promotes racial IQ studies. In other words, like certain races have higher IQs than others and stuff like that. And Stefan Molyneux was actually listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's extremist list. Interestingly, Stefan Molyneux has also been a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast. Who's therefore connected to who? Alex Jones. Alex Jones, not only did he got in trouble because of alleging that the Sandy Hook victims were false flags and actors and stuff like that. Alex Jones, interestingly, fast forward to January 6th, was actually alongside Kenneth Chesborough, a lawyer who was actually trying to help Donald Trump in the fake elector plot. So that was the goal, was to have the January 6th people overturn the election, and to have the fake electors deny Joe Biden the presidency, and then Alex Jones and Kenneth Chesborough were going to start like an InfoWars real live session, kind of talking about how Donald Trump really won the election and stuff like that. This is all interconnected. Like, you almost have to moonwalk it backwards. I almost lose track. That's why I have to write this stuff down. It's like, whoa. So think about that. Jack Posobiec is in wokeness. He's being caught using the 14 words, David Lane, Robert J. Matthews, the white supremacist hate group, The Order. And Robert J. Matthews was actually killed on Whidbey Island in Washington in the 1980s. He was surrounded by federal authorities and FBI agents, and he refused to come out, and they actually had to burn down the house, and he actually burned alive inside in the 1980s. But what's interesting is that in his youth, Robert J. Matthews, as I talked about in my video about Charlie Kirk, was a member of the John Birch Society. John Birch Society, Harry and Lynn Bradley Uihlein. You see, it's all interconnected there. How you can slip from mainstream Republican politics all the way to far-right neo-Nazi politics in just a couple degrees of separation. It's just right there. So let's just go back. And you can just play this game. Watch me just click backwards. Here. And actually, no, let me do this real quick. And then also, this Robert Matthews guy, interestingly, right, not only was he a member of the John Birch Society, the John Birch Society was co-founded by a University of Illinois at Champaign professor named Revillo P. Oliver. Revillo P. Oliver was a white supremacist, eugenicist, racist, segregationist, who was a part of the John Birch Society, and despite how insane the John Birch Society was, he left it because he said the John Birch Society was too Jewish. Because in the 1950s, you started seeing a slow adoption of Zionist evangelical Christianity more so within Republican politics, which would eventually metastasize with Barry Goldwater, the Southern Strategy, etc., right? Therefore, Israel became this kind of like thing you just don't talk about, you don't touch it. But you had a lot of anti-Semites already within Republican politics. So that creates this kind of weird nexus in that party where you have like anti-Semites, but then you have Zionists also alongside each other, right? So Revillo P. Oliver left the John Birch Society and went to go co-found the neo-Nazi organization National Alliance. National Alliance was founded by a former Oregon State professor, William Luther Pierce, who liked to brag about his Confederate ancestry and stuff like that. He was actually an astrophysicist, I believe, or a physicist of some sort. William Luther Pierce, underneath a pseudonym, Andrew McDonald, the fake name, published the book The Turner Diaries. The Turner Diaries went to push the notion of white genocide and the white replacement theory, a theory popularized by Tucker Carlson on Rupert Murdoch's Fox News. Rupert Murdoch's Fox News owns Sky News. Sky News Australia platformed white supremacist Lauren Southern, who also went to South Africa for her documentary talking about how the Africans are trying to kill the Boers and the Afrikaners and stuff like that, which actually got a lot of pushback even from white South Africans. So this is global, is what I'm saying. It's a global fascist network from top to bottom, from 1% to the Confederate stars and bars flying truck driving guy who's brainwashed by Alex Jones and Fox News and OAN and all those right-wing organizations, just one stone away from Stormfront and the Charles Martel Society, and a lot of other right-wing white supremacist organizations, right? So peep this. You can just play a game. Play a game on Wikipedia. I'm going to click on the John Birch Society, and then we're just going to moonwalk backwards. John Birch Society. Who else we got here? I can go to... Oh, also, interestingly, so despite this is about the John Birch Society, despite never considering itself a religious organization, the JBS played a major role in the rise of the moral majority in the Christian right as major political forces, ideologically and tactically influencing multiple leaders in that movement, including Tim LaHaye of the Left Behind series and Phyllis Scalfi. Phyllis Scalfi is very interesting because he I want to say she was actually a woman who was actually on the whatchamacallit. She was an anti-feminist, anti-abortion, female, yada yada, who was kind of like an early Lawrence Southern, kind of like the proto version of her back in like the 1960s and stuff like that. So that's very interesting there. Let me go here. I want to say, who was her spouse? Actually, no, never mind on that. But the John Birch Society, Tim LaHaye of the Left Behind series, you know what I'm saying? Like, so he's the one who kind of helped insert the whole notion of like kind of the rapture theology, like people are just going to vanish out of thin air. And then all of a sudden, all the countries were going to attack Israel. And then was it Magog or whatever? And, you know, then eventually Jesus will come back. And then hopefully all the Jews are back in Israel once Israel is united. Hence why Republicans, so a lot of Republicans don't care about Palestinians because they need Jews back in Israel, therefore to bring forth like the second coming of Christ, I guess. But it's just craziness. And Jews understand that Christians are so desperate for that, but we'll do whatever Israel wants. So therefore we need to we give them armament in order to fulfill our prophecy, even though they don't believe in our Messiah. They have their own Messiah. They don't even have one yet. They have the Moshiach, who is the theoretical Messiah, but the difference between the Jewish and the Christian in times is that I believe like the Jewish thing isn't really about like an event. It's about like unfolding events leading to like an epoch or something like that. But I'm not 100% sure about all the nitty-gritty of that. But that's why you have this cahoots between Jews and Christians, even though Jews don't believe in Jesus, and many Christians want to convert the Jews. So it's like this weird bedfellows type movement. But if I were to go here, Bradley, so Harry Lynn Bradley, then go here, and I believe go here. So the Bradley Foundation. The Donors Trust is a big thing. But you can actually get to, let me see here. Richard and, oh, here we go. So Richard and Elizabeth Uihlein, who I said at the beginning of the video, helped to fund Scott Walker. Scott Walker is now the president of Young Americans. So this family here, if I go here, here we go. So Richard Uihlein's cousin is Lynn Bradley. So they're interconnected with the John Birch Society, which is now actually located in Wisconsin. It used to be in Belmont, Massachusetts. Now it's in Wisconsin. That's why Wisconsin is kind of one of these weird swing states or something. Like it's kind of they like state level politics in Wisconsin has like a very weird right wing, like upper class type thing going on. But so the Uihleins, the Bradleys, John Birch, National Alliance by William Luther Pierce, Turner Diary stuff, Robert J. Matthews, The Order, 14 Words, Jack Posobiec, in Wokeness on Twitter. Interesting. So in October 2016, Posobiec posted a tweet that included triple parentheses, an anti-Semitic symbol. So let me see here. So in response to a 2017 ADL report on the alt-right, which included Posobiec, he tweeted a selfie of his visit to Auschwitz in Poland. I didn't realize this guy was that insane. So we have a Polish Catholic American neo-Nazi who had that's probably why he got a security clearance revoked. They probably realized that he was on Stormfront and all these little groups, and they decided to repeal his security clearance. And now he's been a little clandestine agent operating with impunity on Elon Musk's X account. That's probably what happened. So in 2017, Posobiec promoted on Twitter an event staged by Oboz Narodowo Radikalny, a Polish neo-fascist movement that bombed Jewish homes in the 1930s. Posobiec later deleted this tweet promoting the event. Jeez, man. And he probably learned this all at home, you know what I'm saying? Like, I guarantee his dad, his parents. And that's the thing about Poland. You know, Poland's our ally, but at the same time, unfortunately, there is a deep-seated history of anti-Semitism in Poland, even though the Polish were also themselves discriminated against by the Nazis and the Germans and, you know, abused by the Soviets. It's just more of that Eastern European Byzantine vendetta system that they have over there. So in 2017, following the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, that led to violent clashes between white nationalists and anti-protesters, Posobiec said that the rally had become massive propaganda for the left and that the mainstream media was fanning the flames of this violence. He said that Trump should have disavowed Black Lives Matters. Posobiec later tweeted that he had consistently disavowed white nationalism and violence. He also tweeted that he was done with trolling. I'm done with trolling. I'm just done. You know what I'm saying? Like, get out of here, bro. So what you're admitting is you were a troll. Now I'm done. I'm putting the keyboard away. My wife took it away, and it was so. In that it was time to do the right thing. Posobiec has frequently tweeted about white supremacist, white genocide conspiracy theories. Another reason why you can never trust a Nazi. They'll lie. They don't believe in truths. They don't believe in democracy. It's just pure power, Nietzschean, solipsistic, relativistic will to power. So on June 9th, 2022, the Southern Poverty Law Center listed Posobiec as an extremist. Good. Citing his links to hate groups such as the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. Remember, Proud Boys, that's Donald Trump saying, stand back and stand by. And he never even disavowed them when asked right in front of the American people. So we can go more into more detail about that, right? So this Jack Posobiec guy is insane. Like, you can almost have a video on him, right? So let's kind of keep going. Let's keep going here. So Michael Flynn, talking about his digital armies, had connections to the Russiagate stuff. But at the same time, people have tried to discredit Russiagate. So what I like to say is, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Just because there may have been some weird insider DC stuff by the Clintons or whomever, I don't know, does not mean that Russia has not tried to have influence over the United States. For example, Red Ice TV, a neo-Nazi site, Viking Volkish site with Laura Lockteff. She's from Portland, Oregon. She admits to having Russian descent, and she's a neo-Nazi. Lauren Wetsky or something from Delaware. She's a neo-Nazi. She claimed to have Russian descent. The leader of the American, I think, Ku Klux Klan or Brotherhood or something, Richard Butler, not to be confused with Richard Spencer. His girlfriend, a former porn star, ironically named Bianca Trump. You can't make this up. Who is actually Puerto Rican in real life. I guess she doesn't know what she is, or something like that. Bianca Trump got arrested in Spokane, Washington, North Idaho with Richard Butler for some sort of issue. And while arrested and being dragged to the police car, she screamed that she was proud of her Russian blood. Then that's not to mention Marina Butina. That's not to mention the Trump meeting that I'm about to go in which there was ties to Russia. We're not even. I haven't even mentioned Donald Trump with what's his name, Ralph Nader, I think, or Sater or something. Not Ralph Nader, but Felix Sater. Felix Sater of Bayrock Capital, in which like Trump towers were being used to like launder Russian money or something like that. Because real estate is always a good way to kind of like just launder money. You just buy apartments. And New York is weird because you actually buy apartments. You just don't rent apartments. And there was that whole scandal with Bayrock Capital. And Donald Trump was investigated for that. I mean, it's wild. And then also Jack Posobiec at Unite the Right march in Charlottesville, where that young lady got ran over by that neo-Nazi and everything. And Donald Trump tried to make it sound like there was bad people on both sides or something, or whatever. Not calling out like the Nazis, like they're Nazis, bro. The thing about Unite the Right was Richard Spencer separately was over here talking about singing songs, "You will not replace us, Russia is our friend." They always cut that part out. He was singing "Russia is our friend" because his wife is Nina Kupriyanova, his ex-wife. He actually beat up his own wife and she filed for divorce. Nina Kupriyanova was born in, I think, Georgia, the Soviet state of Georgia during like the Soviet Union, but she's very pro-Russia. And she is noted as having popularized the works of Aleksandr Dugin and his fourth political theory, which advocates for the very disinformation campaigns that Michael Flynn is talking about. She helped popularize that within the American alt-right. And even Richard Spencer, when interviewed by Vice News years ago, even admitted that Donald Trump was basically memed into existence. Like the alt-right was memed into existence. Like they used memes and 8chan and online stuff almost as the occult, as an analogy. They'll even say that themselves. In other words, they were using memetics, memes, meme craft, online disinformation as a form of alchemy in a way to distort reality in order to push the world that they wanted to onto the world. And that's why you have Satanists like Sticks and Hammer 666, who was on YouTube. I still believe is on YouTube. Who is like this satanic libertarian over here shilling and pandering to Donald Trump. And remember, by the way, even though we're in far right neo-Nazi territory, there's still a nexus with Israel here. Because I think that Israel, because of their trauma experience in World War II, kind of have this fetishism towards power. In other words, it's might makes right. Therefore, they were abused by the Nietzschean Germanic Übermensch. Therefore, they need to become the Jewish Übermensch. And as a result, they become odd bedfellows with the American and European right wing, because the Israelis are kind of like emulating what they're doing. And the Israelis, interestingly, most of them are from Europe, so they are white. They're like white. They're white Jews. You know what I'm saying? Like you already had Jewish people in the Middle East. You have Jews even in Ethiopia and places like that. But you have this Ashkenazi European white Jews coming down after World War II. And I'm not saying that they don't belong in Israel. They needed a place to stay because there was a lot of abuse even after the liberation of the concentration camps against the Jews. But now that they're in Israel, they're almost kind of like turned it into like a white supremacist ethno state. And because of the cross junction between the American evangelical Christian far right, that's why I'm saying you have this nexus between Israeli Zionism and colonial settlerism, whatever, versus the Palestinians in cahoots with white supremacists, neo-Confederates, things of that nature. Many of the trolls you see online are Israelis, and we're going to get into that here soon. So to kind of keep going here, I'm going to pause it real quick and take a quick break. All right, so this is Trump Tower meeting. So this is about Trump-Russia relations right here, right? So let me check my volume. I think I'm good. All right, so a meeting took place at Trump Tower in New York City on June 9th, 2016 between three senior members of the 2016 Trump campaign, Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort, four other U.S. citizens, and Russian lawyer Natalia Vasilnitskaya. The meeting was arranged by publicist and longtime Trump acquaintance Rob Goldstone. Let me see here. Wow, that guy looks insane. Acquaintance Rob Goldstone on behalf of his client, Russian singer Amin Alagarov. The meeting was first disclosed to U.S. government officials in April 2017 when Kushner filed a revised version of his security clearance form. So Donald Trump Jr. made several misleading statements about the meeting. He initially told the press that the meeting was held to discuss adoptions of Russian children by Americans. On July 8, 2017, after news reports stated that Trump Jr. knew the meeting was political, he admitted in a tweet that he had agreed to the meeting with the understanding that he would receive information damaging to Hillary Clinton, and that he was conducting opposition research. When New York Times was about to report on email exchanges between Goldstone and Trump Jr., Trump Jr. himself published the emails. So wow, so Trump Jr. made several misleading statements. He initially told the press that the meeting was held to discuss adoptions of Russian children by Americans. On July 8th, after news reports stated that Trump Jr. knew this meeting was political, he admitted in a tweet that he had agreed to the meeting with the understanding he would receive damaging information on Hillary Clinton, and he was conducting opposition research. So this goes to show that Russians supposedly had damaging information on Hillary Clinton, and Donald Jr. was willing to accept that without telling authorities that this foreign government had damaging information on a U.S. citizen. So when New York Times was about to report, yada yada, so Donald Jr. published the emails himself. So in early July 2017, it was reported that then President Donald Trump himself drafted Donald Trump's Jr.'s initial misleading statement. The report was later confirmed by the president's attorneys. So, Dad, I'm in trouble. Help me out. In July 2018, the president denied knowledge of the meeting. So they seem to be just lying. So Robert Mueller, the special counsel of the Department of Justice in charge of Russian relation investigations, investigated the emails and the meetings and their relation to the Russian interference in the 2016 United States elections. So prior to Trump Tower meeting, Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos met at least twice with Joseph Misfud, who asserted his awareness that Russians had thousands of emails that were damaging to Hillary Clinton. Interesting. So this occurred before the hacking of the DNC computers became public knowledge. Papadopoulos later shared this information with at least two other people including an Australian diplomat to Britain. At a meeting on March 24, 2016, the professor brought along a Russian woman, Olga Polonskaya. Papadopoulos made multiple unsuccessful attempts to set up meetings in Russia between Trump or members of his campaign and Russian officials. So George Papadopoulos was this intermediary between Joseph Misfud and so Papadopoulos later shared this information at least twice, including. So Papadopoulos somehow is the intermediary between the Russians and Trump somehow. So he communicated his proposals and interactions to several Trump campaign officials. So in October 2017, he pleaded guilty to one count of making false statements to the FBI about his actions. So on June 3rd, 2016, before the public was made aware of potential Russian interference in the presidential election, Donald Trump Jr. was contacted by Rob Goldstone, a British music publicist whose association with the Trumps dates back to the Miss Universe 2013 pageant held in Moscow. At the time, Trump Jr.'s father, businessman Trump Jr., had been co-owner of the pageant. So wow. So 2016, Donald Trump Jr. was contacted by Rob Goldstone, whose association with the Trumps dates back to the Miss Universe pageant. At the time, Trump Jr.'s father, businessman Donald Trump, had been owner of the pageant. Goldstone's client, Amin Alagarov, an Azerbaijani singer, performed at the Miss Universe event. His father, Aras Algalarov, is a wealthy and real estate developer in Moscow. So someone knows someone who knows someone type situations going on through the grapevine. So anyways, a meeting ends up happening, right? So we go here. Okay, so in his June 3rd email to Trump Jr., Goldstone wrote, "Amin just called and asked me to contact you with something very interesting. The Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father, Aras, this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government support of Mr. Trump, helped along with Aras and Amin." Trump Jr. responded, "Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. I am on the road at the moment, but perhaps I just speak to Amin first. Seems we have some time, and if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. Could we do a call first thing next week when I am back?" In a June 7th email, it was agreed that the material would be delivered to Trump Jr. by an unnamed quote-unquote Russian government attorney. At the meeting, Goldstone introduced this person as Moscow-based attorney Natalia Veselnitskaya. She stated that she was not a government official. However, she is known to have ties to the Russian government, and later described herself as a quote-unquote informant to the office of the Russian Prosecutor General. According to Goldstone, she had planned to be in New York for a court appearance on June 9th. Trump Jr. offered an in-person meeting that afternoon, which Goldstone confirmed. Trump Jr. forwarded the email thread to Kushner and Manafort. So they're just kind of going around New York, having a good time, just plotting stuff. All right, so the arranged meeting took place at Trump Tower in the afternoon on June 6, 2016. At least 8 people attended. When the meeting first became known, conflicting accounts of who attended circulated. With time, more names came forward. At first, Donald Trump Jr. did not disclose that Irakli Ike, i.e. Ike, Kavaladze, Rob Goldstone, Rob Goldstone, all these Russian names, and Anatoly Samakronov attended the meeting. So participants, Jared Kushner. So we know that Jared Kushner is essentially in charge of, the Middle East, Israeli policy. He funds settlers and stuff like that in the West Bank. His father was like a high up real estate person in New Jersey who later got in trouble for trying to like sexually incriminate his own family member or whatever. And I think Chris Christie is the one who like threw him in jail, which is the reason why Kushner has such a beef with Chris Christie, and Chris Christie was kicked off the Trump campaign or something like that. So a lot of vendettas there. Paul Manafort, campaign manager for presidential campaign of Donald Trump, who was later actually indicted because I know he had a bunch of weird ties to like Cyprus, and like he didn't register as like a foreign agent or something like that. Donald Trump Jr., the Russian lobbyist. So we had Natalia Vasilnitskaya, who is a Russian lawyer best known in the United States for lobbying against the Magnitsky Act. So the Magnitsky Act is, let me see here, is a bipartisan bill passed by the U.S. Congress and signed into law by President Barack Obama in December 2012, intending to punish Russian officials responsible for the death of Russian tax lawyer Sergei Magnitsky in a Moscow prison in 2009, and also to grant permanent normal trade relation status to Russia. So the Global Magnitsky Act of 2016 within the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act authorizes the U.S. government to sanction those government officials worldwide that are human rights offenders, freeze their assets, and ban them from entering the U.S. So in 2009, a Russian tax lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, died in Moscow prison after investigating a $230 million fraud involving Russian tax officials. Magnitsky was accused of committing the fraud himself by the Russian officials and detained. While in prison, Magnitsky developed gallstones, pancreatitis, and cellulose cholis. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. And was not given medical treatment for months. After a year of imprisonment, he was beaten to death while in custody. Magnitsky's friend, Bill Browder, a prominent American-born businessman who worked extensively in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, publicized the case and lobbied American officials to pass legislation sanctioning individuals involved in corruption. Browder brought his case to Senators Benjamin Cardin and John McCain, who proposed the legislation, and it was signed into law by Barack Obama on December 14, 2012. So she lobbied against this anti-Russian corruption type thing, right? According to the New York Times, in Moscow, this Vasilnitskaya lady was regarded as a quote-unquote trusted insider who has argued cases for government agencies and high-profile clients, including Pyotr Katsev, an official in the state-owned Russian railways, and his son Denis, whom she defended against money laundering charge in New York. She has also been an informant in active communication with Yuri Chaika, the Russian prosecutor general, since 2013. Starting in 2017, she had worked with Fusion GPS, the firm that was later hired to do operation research on Trump, to investigate the unrelated money laundering case involving Prevezon Holding, and the quote-unquote dirt she brought with her to the meeting stemmed from that work. So she started working for Fusion GPS, the firm that later hired her to do opposition research on Trump to investigate an unrelated money laundering case involving Prevezon Holding. So the work on Prevezon case and later on the dossier were completely separate. The Fusion GPS co-founder, Glenn Simpson, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee that they were unaware that Vasilnitskaya would meet with Trump campaign members or share anything from the Prevezon case with them. Also at the meeting was Reinat Akhmetshin, a Russian-American lobbyist and former Soviet counterintelligence officer, suspected of having ongoing ties with Russian intelligence, although he denies it. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, he immigrated to the United States in 1993 and became a U.S. citizen in 2009. According to the New York Times, this Renat guy has a history of working with close allies of President Vladimir Putin. Other participants included that Rob Goldstone guy, and just other people too. What is this? An Anatoly Shamashrov, who worked for Meridian International. Which is a non-profit diplomacy organization. Seems kind of strange. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Need to look more into that. Meridian International Center. Wow. So, in other words, they had this Trump meeting. Man, I can go into details, but it'll just be too long. But we know that this is more proof that the Trump administration had contacts with Russians and stuff like that. So now I kind of want to get over to, here we go, Russian bot farms. So remember Michael Flynn, digital armies, stuff like that, kind of in cahoots with the Russian bot farms, in my opinion. So, and the sad truth is that all of these right-wing people, so you have the American right-wing, British right-wing, European right-wing, Russian right-wing, Israeli right-wing, and even the anti-communist Chinese dissident right-wing within the CCP proper, through like clandestine kind of bot farms, Hong Kong and Taiwan, as they're trying to promote this online global fascist network in order to undermine democracy. The one group that they can agree to hate on, the Jews included, which is unfortunate, is black people. Black people are typically the victims of most of the racism online. More than I've seen, I rarely see anti-Asian racism and tropes and, you know, old caricatures about how they talk and eyes and stuff. I rarely see stuff about Jews even. But you got to think, who owns Facebook? Who owns Meta? Who owns these things? And we already know that Zuckerberg is co-opted, even though he claims that he learned his lesson, because we know that he is willing to give up people's personal data to groups like Cambridge Analytica. So I would consider Zuckerberg even to be a part of the Zionist sort of element to this global fascist right-wing network that I like to call the ACZS network, which stands for Anglo-American for the US and Britain, Continental standing for Continental Europe, more of the NATO Catholic countries and stuff like that. Then you have Zionist, which is two branches, who are the Anglo-American Zionists, like the Bible Belt Christians of America, and evangelical Christian megachurches of America, but also the British Israeli movement of the 1800s, which actually led, what's his name, which actually was one of the influential forces in inspiring, I think, the Balfour Declaration for the establishment of the proto-state of Israel. The British Israeli movement was an Israeli movement similar to the U.S. evangelical movement that happened kind of in the late Victorian era, in which the British people actually thought that they were the lost tribe of Israel, and that the British people and the white Brits actually had stewardship over, they were basically chosen by God to rule over the Holy Land. So a lot of Jews were just like, okay, you can believe that if you want. So what you're really telling me is, if you take over Israel from the Ottomans, you're going to give us Israel. So therefore, you had this weird kind of bedfellows of the British Israeli movement with the actual Jewish movement of the Rothschilds and stuff like that in cahoots to essentially acquire the land of Palestine from the Ottomans. Because you got to think, in World War II, you can almost consider World War II to kind of be the last great royal battle, because you had King George, who was a cousin of, I'm sorry, World War I, you had King George, who was a cousin to Kaiser Wilhelm. And Kaiser Wilhelm and King George were cousins to Tsar Nicholas. Tsar Nicholas had already been overthrown by the Bolsheviks. How did the Bolsheviks get all those weapons? A lot of historians speculate that it was actually an early form of regime change, because Tsar Nicholas was unpopular, and his cousins, even though they were blood, they were still competitors. In other words, get him out the way, and then maybe there would be some backdoor deal with the Soviets to actually monopolize the resources and hand those resources like oil and stuff over to Western powers like Standard Oil. Because when Stalin and the Bolsheviks took over, they actually sent Soviet oil engineers to talk to the Rockefellers to help them finance early Russian oil industry. So there's a whole deeper history over there or whatnot. But to stay on track here, this is just the Russian bot farm stuff, so we know that. Then we have Black Cube. Black Cube is an Israeli-based private intelligence agency of former Mossad agents, and they got brought to light by during the whole Me Too movement, Harvey Weinstein scandal. Harvey Weinstein actually hired Black Cube because he's Jewish. He knows some of those people over there, to hire Black Cube agents to get dirt on the women who were alleging he sexually assaulted them. Then you got, what is this here? Some more stuff here. Let me pull this up. This is Unit 8200. Is an Israeli intelligence corps, unit of the Israeli Defense Forces responsible for a clandestine operation in collecting signal intelligence and code decryption, counterintelligence, cyber warfare, military intelligence, and surveillance. Right? So that's interesting. So if I go to, let me do something here, close you, and I think, so that's Unit 8200, and then there's also something called the Talpiot program. Talpiot program is a Israeli Defense Force training program, program for recruits who have demonstrated outstanding academic ability in the science and leadership potential. Graduates pursue higher education while they serve in the Army, and they use their expertise to further IDF research and development in technological leadership positions. The program was inaugurated in 1979. I wouldn't be surprised if Netanyahu himself was a member of this, because after he served in the IDF, he later went to Boston to study at MIT and was actually a member of Boston Consulting Group, one of the top consulting groups in the country. Let me see here. So notable alumni, let me see here. So Yuri Arlon, Yoav Frund, let me see here. Marius Nacht, one of the co-founders of Checkpoint Software Technologies. Let me see here. And you also got a thing too that, what's that one company, WeWork, that crashed or whatever. The CEO of that was also former Israeli military as well. So they train a lot. In other words, even though there's a high probability, of course, you're going to have some sort of Israeli defense connections if you're Israeli, because you have to serve in the military. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that information sharing is kind of being shared with Israel to advance their own economy and stuff like that. But what I wanted to do was something Israeli cyber vice news. So let's go here.
Collaboration is smoother than ever with Dell AI PCs that are simple and secure for IT to manage.
Embarrassed to take your shirt off at the pool, I will get you shredded like a god for the summer, or you won't pay a dime. This is very specifically for men over 30 who make at the bare minimum $150K a year. If that's you, over the next 45 seconds, I'm going to show you how to get completely ripped for the summer and why men like you need a radically different approach to fitness and nutrition than the broke gym junkie who has all day to spend at the gym. There's 3 steps that men like you must take to get shredded like a god. Step number 1, tell the truth. Next time you take a shower, take your shirt off and look at yourself in the mirror. Seriously, tonight before you go to bed, really look at yourself.
The department says it seized 2 internet domains and searched nearly 1,000 social media accounts used by Russian actors. They are accused of spreading disinformation in the U.S. and abroad. Authorities say that the bot farm used AI to create fake social media profiles impersonating Americans and posted support for Russia's war in Ukraine with them.
This game, you're not ready for it.
This Canadian veteran recently returned home to Quebec after narrowly escaping Ukraine with his life. He was fighting in the Donbass back in April when his volunteer unit was ambushed by a Russian tank.
There was this huge explosion and I saw the shrapnels flying in front of me.
The Canadian sniper, known as Wally, spent 2 months in the battlefield, where he also got caught in a propaganda war.
The Russians are not sophisticated fighters.
After providing interviews to Western journalists back in March, Wally's story went viral. Russia responded, first with posts suggesting he'd been killed. Then state media wrote that Wally had condemned Ukraine's military as a terrible disappointment, full of chaos, looting, and incompetence.
They pretty much took a few words I did and deformed it just enough so it kind of makes sense. So it sounds like I'm terribly disappointed, which I'm not.
What he actually said to a French newspaper was that war itself is a disappointment, particularly for inexperienced Western volunteers who initially rushed to Ukraine looking for adventure. Wally says the Ukrainian soldiers he met on the front line were anything but disappointing.
I really do think they are the most courageous soldier I ever saw, personally.
But those twisted facts and misquotes were heavily promoted online by a small army of professional internet trolls, like Ksenia Klochkova. At the start of the war, the Russian journalist went undercover inside a Russian troll factory, a new operation called Cyberfront Z. When I was hired, they told me this is a temporary enterprise to support Russia's army in cyberspace, Klochkova told Global News. She says they used fake accounts, often with Western names, to post comments on YouTube and across social media, praising Putin and condemning those who oppose the war. She says the people in charge are linked to this former, now notorious troll factory in St. Petersburg, which was accused of meddling in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. The operation employed 100 people per shift, she says. They were paid $1,000 a month and were required to publish at least 200 comments every day. Those comments pushing the Kremlin's narrative that Russia is liberating Ukraine from Nazis were then reinforced by Russian state media.
It's impossible to defeat Russia.
Yevgeny Popov is one of Russia's most popular TV hosts. He claims, for example, that atrocities committed by Russian forces against Ukrainian civilians in Bucha were fake.
Russia have no connections to those dead bodies.
When asked for evidence, he falsely claimed that it took Ukraine 5 days to reveal civilians had been massacred, and that the victims were never identified.
Give us the names. Give us the names. Give us the families.
Global News and other world media outlets have identified many names of civilians killed in Bucha. But a quick, simple online search also turns up articles referencing those Russian conspiracies, a testament to how effectively the Kremlin has flooded the internet with disinformation, burying the truth, no matter the cost. Jeff Semple, Global News.
I want to buy your house. I can pay you cash for your house, no matter what condition it's in. If you need to sell your
So yeah, I just wanted to highlight some of that stuff about like the Russian troll farms and the capabilities of the Israelis. And I'm not saying that Israel is like our enemy or anything. I consider Israel an ally, and I want Israel to exist and all that type of stuff. I'm not here to promote any sort of anti-Israel stuff as far as the state of Israel. But at the same time, I'm just trying to point to that it seems that maybe not even certain Zionists, maybe even at their own behest or without the sanctions of the government, just like you have Israeli settlers who often clash with the Israeli government or something, could be possibly involved in a lot of this troll farming, AI commenter type stuff as well, to promote this kind of right-wing movement online, because they realize the more right-wing things goes, it benefits Israel, because a lot of people consider Israel to be a right-wing state as is, because they want to restrict immigration. They're trying to make it a 100% Jewish ethno state, etc. I've already kind of explained that a little bit, but what's interesting is this is that Kenneth Chesborough guy who was with Alex Jones during the January 6th stuff, right? So, newly released messages reveals fake electors plot continued after U.S. Capitol attack. CNN reveals where Trump's CEO or Trump co-defendant was on January 6th with Alex Jones, as you see right there, right? Alex Jones, InfoWars, Roger Stone, Jerome Corsi, like it goes on. Just the network of the right wing it's like an ant colony. It's just everywhere.
With our servers designed for AI, you can revolutionize the way you do business, power your workloads, and empower.
new exclusive CNN reporting this morning about pro-Trump lawyer Kenneth Chesborough and his whereabouts, where he was at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th during the insurrection. He was the alleged architect behind the plan to submit a fraudulent slate of electors after Trump lost the 2020 race. He was among 19 people, including Trump, indicted this week on racketeering and other charges in Georgia's election subversion case. Our senior crime and justice correspondent, Jerome Porcupez, has this exclusive reporting. Where was he?
Well, according to a CNN investigation, what we found is that he was outside the doors of the Capitol on January 6th, surrounded by the mob of protesters, but also significantly following around a leading voice of the Stop the Steal movement and conspiracy theorist, Alex Jones. And now this morning, the big question, what was he doing there?
He is one of the alleged co-conspirators in 2 cases against Donald Trump for 2020 election interference. Now, for the first time, CNN has identified Kenneth Chesebro outside the Capitol on January 6th, shortly before a mob stormed the east side of the building. He followed right-wing conspiracy theorist Alex Jones for about an hour. Chesebro is the alleged architect of a plot to use fake electors to stop the certification of Joe Biden's win. This week, he was indicted, along with Trump and 17 others in Georgia. He's also been identified as an unindicted co-conspirator in the federal case against the former president.
CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States.
In the days after the November 2020 election, Chesebro wrote a memo to a lawyer for Donald Trump. It's among the earliest known documents outlining the legal strategy Trump would allegedly try to use. His memo focuses on January 6 as the hard deadline with ultimate significance to determine the validity of electoral votes. Emails obtained by the January 6 committee show Chesebro later suggesting to the Trump campaign that the fear of, quote, wild chaos on that day could provoke the Supreme Court to take action.
Go to the White House!
At the same time, Alex Jones was helping pay for and plan the January 6th rally, urging his massive audience to gather in Washington, D.C. The night before Trump's rally, Jones would warn of a coming battle.
This will be their Waterloo. This will be their destruction.
We fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. When the January 6th committee asked if Chesebro was in Washington the first week of January, Chesebro pleaded the 5th.
Let's start marching to the Capitol!
But there is no question, he was there. CNN has analyzed publicly available photos and videos from that day which show his movements. In the hours before the insurrection, he was with Alex Jones and his entourage, a short distance from the Capitol. Chesebro is here, wearing a red Trump 2020 hat. As lawmakers prepare to certify the results of the election inside the building, Chesebro follows Alex Jones and a crowd of protesters as they walk towards the Capitol. Chesebro has his phone out, seemingly recording Jones's every move.
Let's march around to the other side! And let's not fight the police and give the system what they want! We are peaceful!
As Jones was leading a crowd to the east side of the Capitol, the west side was breached, and rioters poured in. At one point, while Chesebro was on Capitol grounds, he appears to show something on his phone to a member of Jones's security team. Then Jones and Chesebro climb the Capitol steps.
1776! 1776!
There is no indication Chesebro entered the Capitol building or engaged in violence. But shortly after Chesebro and Jones left the steps on the east side, the Capitol was breached again as the mob poured into the doors. In all, more than 2,000 rioters would enter the building, vandalizing and looting, attempting to prevent a joint session of Congress from counting the Electoral College votes. The House committee investigating January 6 would eventually call it the final step in Donald Trump's plan to try and overturn the election, a plan that started in earnest with Kenneth Chesebro.
Wow. So, yeah, I guess we'll just wrap it up there. And it's just interesting. Like I said, it's just, yeah, I mean, it all makes sense to me. I mean, I think all the stuff is there for you and, take your research or whatever the way you want. But to me, that's kind of what's going on. This kind of right-wing troll network is going to be very pivotal in the 2024 election, I'm sure. And, I don't really know if, Facebook is going to put up a fight. I don't know if, Twitter's already gone. We already know that. YouTube, I don't know, man. I'm even suspicious about, YouTube and their connections to Thiel and the PayPal mafia and all that type of stuff or whatever, So, yeah, and I'm sure videos like this, I noticed I don't really get too many views, but, if anybody does watch this and they're sympathetic to what I'm saying, just kind of take the information and do what you will and hopefully make something creative yourself. So I'm just going to wrap it up there. Yeah, just wrap it up. All right, thank you. All right, bye.